Okay, so welcome again, everyone. Welcome to the EV Summit, part of Tran-SET Conference 2022. We're gonna have our panelist chair, Miss Laura Rogers. She's gonna be sharing the session and moderating it. Laura Rogers is a Deputy Director at the RAI, responsible for the development and execution of operational policies for the organization and transferring and scaling the sustainable technologies demonstrated on the RAI Highway to Transportation Agency, nationally and internationally. Prior to joining the RAI, Laura worked for 14 years in the federal, state, and private sectors in the areas of environmental program management, sustainability, energy, and regulatory compliance. Most recently, Laura led the energy, sustainability, and environmental stewardship policies and programs at Maryland Department of Transportation's headquarters. Laura conceptualized and designed and executed the MDOT statewide solar program. Welcome, and I'll leave the floor to Laura. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the EV Summit. So we're going to try to make this really fun and interactive. So just to let you know how we're going to roll this out, we're going to have each of our presenters come up and give a presentation. And then after the presentations, we will have a break. And then we have a lot of good time to roll into Q&A. So, you'll see as we go through the presentations and the introductions for each of our speakers, we have a wealth of knowledge in EV charging infrastructure on this panel from different sectors and different levels of government. So I'm really excited to have this panel come together to talk about EV charging. I know it's a hot topic on everybody's mind, and these folks have been doing it for a long time. So I'm really excited to get going on this. All right, so up first we have Laura Morrison. Working to achieve equitable and universal adoption of electric transportation in Texas by 2035, Laura leads the Textra Education Fund, which is a 501c3 organization, in developing policies and programs that bring communities and resources together to reduce transportation emissions, to address concerns about climate change, health costs, the economy, and environmental justice. Efforts have led to fleet electrification of major metro counties, university collaborations on workplace and student EV charging infrastructure, and grassroots policy recommendations on implementing the Federal Justice 40 Directive in the U.S. National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Funds in Texas. The organization is currently developing an electric transportation roadmap for the state of Texas in collaboration with a wide variety of stakeholders. Prior to this work and with deep involvement in the Austin community, Laura served as an Austin City Council member for 2 terms, focusing on community development and public health, emerging technology and digital inclusion, and sustainable water and energy policies. During her service, she was often recognized for her efforts, including as a champion for working families, the Grand Marshal of the Pride Parade, an honorary ambassador to the sister city of Oita in Japan, and for her advocacy for families and youth. She was also an engineer with Lockheed Martin, developing decision support and business compliance systems. She has a master's and bachelor's degrees in mathematics from the University of California, Berkeley, and San Diego, respectively, and a graduate certificate in disaster management from the University of North Carolina School of Public Health. So let's please welcome Laura.
Thank you, Laura. You set the bar pretty high. This has to be fun, right? So I'll do my best, but I'm not sure about that. Although working in electric transportation is really fun, I have to say that. I want to start out by saying that I've been in this field for 3 years now, and it's been really interesting to watch the change from 3 years ago. It's really talking about early adopters. And if you're familiar with the S-curve for technology adoption, we're way past the early adopters now, moving into the acceleration phase. And you can look at, for instance, some statistics about, I think from 20 to 21, global sales of electric vehicles doubled from 4 to 8% overall. in the United States. Sales of EVs from all of 21 to the first half of 22 doubled. So we're already seeing an increase in the rate of the uptake. And another interesting thing I see is that whereas before, when we were working with fleet managers, it was very much a political issue. We could talk about it in more progressive areas, not so much in less progressive areas, more conservative counties, for instance. But now we see counties, like even Tarrant County just passed a resolution this week saying that they were going to electrify their fleet, which is pretty cool because they're not really known as being big on environmental issues. So it's getting beyond the political as far as I can tell. So that's exciting. I should say that really the goal is to reduce transportation emissions. That's what's important here. And adopting electric transportation is just one of many parts of the solution for doing that. So what I'm going to talk about today, if I can figure out how to click this, that one. Basically, I just want to go over what I see as the challenges and the opportunities in transitioning to electric transportation, and then look at what's going on here in advancing electric transportation in Texas, specifically at the local, state, and federal level. I should mention that Tran-SET also has a sister organization. Our education fund is a C3. We have a C6 that's able to do lobbying at the state, so we work at the state level also. So what are the challenges and the opportunities? It sort of depends on your perspective, and I really like this chart. It's a little bit old, I should warn you. I think it was done in 21 last year or at the end of the year before that. And the question is, what are your challenges and opportunities from a consumer perspective versus a fleet manager perspective? And you can see that for the consumer, it was really what's most critical is the upfront price of the vehicles, whereas for the fleet managers, it's the range. But everybody has concerns about what are the models that are available, whether infrastructure is there, and also what the charging time is. The good news is that we have things are progressing on all of those fronts right now. Charging time, for instance, I think we'll hear more about electric charging infrastructure and how that's improving. But for instance, there was an article in the Washington Post just recently that said that the government researchers had found a way to charge electric car batteries up to 90% in just 10 minutes. And they think that that's about 5 years away from actually going to the market. If you look at, let's see, the other one we'll be talking about infrastructure more later, but I wanted to look at some of the other issues in terms of range. Obviously, range is increasing in the models that are coming out. Looks like, in fact, in this chart that the average range is staying about the same, but the maximum range is what is increasing these days. And we'll be hearing actually more about the NEVI plan that's going to be bringing $5 billion worth of charging to the freeways around the United States. And so range is going to be less of an issue, I think, because people will understand that they'll be able to charge in long distance. This one is looking at the models. Obviously, the number of models is exploding in terms of passenger and truck and SUVs. And it's interesting to look at what a difference one model can make. Certainly, Tesla has been pervasive on the market, but the percent of Teslas that are being sold out of all is going down now. And as soon as the F-150 Lightning is able to build up their supply, that's for sure going to be taking off because that's one of the most popular vehicles on the road in the United States today. This is a little confusing. The point of this article is trying to say that as prices of batteries go down, obviously the price of the car is going to go down. And this projection was from 2020, and if you look at the bars on the bottom, the gray and the yellow, what it's showing is the price of a Camry compared to the price of a 350 mile range EV over the years, and they see that coming down. I'm not sure that in 2023 it'll really be 26,000 and match it due to the supply chain constraints, but it's definitely the way it's headed. And then in terms of prices, it's important really to look at total cost of ownership, not just what is the upfront price, because as we all know, maintenance and fuel is going to be a lot cheaper. In fact, Consumer Reports did a study last year, I think it was, that said that even last year, maybe the end of 20, the typical driver was going to save $6,000 to $10,000 over the life of a vehicle if they were driving EVs, and that was with fuel, gasoline charges at that time, which is even more now. And City of Austin, you'll be hearing more from Transportation Department, but the Fleet Department has been working with electric vehicles and hybrids since 2017, I think. And they had projected that they would save $3.5 million as they were ramping up over 10 years. And in fact, they're 12 to 18 months ahead of schedule. And then there are very important issues system-wide to be thinking about in terms of what are the challenges and opportunities. We need to talk about a sustainable and resilient electric resource, i.e. how is the grid going to be able to handle all of this? Obviously, it needs to be renewable energy, and luckily we're moving toward that. It needs to be done in such a way so that it's not a strain on the grid. And that's why we need smart charging, total cost of ownership. And studies have shown that it is manageable if we do it right here in the state of Texas. And we also need to think about EVs on the grid, not just as a challenge, but also as an opportunity, because in fact, they can serve as a distributed energy resource. And the PUC right now is doing a study on that, so that's good. With regard to battery supply, obviously we want to make sure that the battery supply is socially responsible when the minerals are mined, and that they're recycled and reused appropriately. And in the state of Texas, we do have the TCEQ has a working group right now. There's a lot of work going on in how to make sure we reuse them and then recycle what can't be reused. Let's see, when it comes to adequate vehicle supplies, I think we all know that that's an issue right now with regard to supply chain and chips and all over the world. So that's something that's being worked on, and luckily there was the Chip and Science Act that was passed at the federal level just earlier this month that should help that along. And when it comes to charging infrastructure, we really need to be thinking in terms of charging in these different use cases. First is for long distance travel, although most people don't travel long distance hardly ever. So in terms of range anxiety, it's interesting that to know that the average commute is something like 40 miles a day, which is easily done on pretty much any electric vehicle that you have. Obviously for fleets, it's really important that the infrastructure is there and that is handled appropriately by, in terms of integrating it with the utility where that electricity is going to be coming from. When it comes to residential, if you live in a single family house, that's pretty easy to be able to charge at home. The big challenge though is that, at least in Austin, I think in San Antonio, a lot of places, half or more than half the people live in multifamily. So multifamily charging is a big, important area. And if you live in multifamily, probably the second most convenient place to park, to charge would be at your workplace. So hopefully workplace charging will be improved in the near future. And then of course there's public access. And we need to think in terms of rural and urban, two different environments, especially when it comes to the state of Texas. And those can be community destinations. Where are you going to be spending time anyways? And then street side charging. And then the last thing on here that I want to mention is equitable access, because it's important, and there is a huge push from the feds to make sure that all the work that we do is addressing equitable access. With their Justice 40 initiative, which you may have heard of, and that is an initiative that says that 40% of all the benefits of the federal program should be to the advantage and to the benefit of disadvantaged communities. So what does that mean exactly when it comes to, say, charging stations that are going to be funded? It could mean that 40% of them are put in areas that are disadvantaged communities or in areas that serve disadvantaged communities. But when I've heard the feds talk about it, and at a conference, this was the most pervasive thing, and that was, it's important to realize that other benefits include air quality improvements. Other benefits could include job opportunities, wealth building opportunities, and that it's important that we speak with the communities themselves to see what is their priority about what benefits they would like to see. When it comes to access, we're talking about not only charging infrastructure, but also vehicles, and finding ways to ensure that there's education outreach and programs in place so that lower income and communities of color will be able to really access them. Because especially we're thinking about disproportionate impact of the transportation emissions, folks that live along the freeways in lower income areas, for instance. And there really are opportunities especially with all this federal money coming down, for training and jobs and for wealth building for small businesses to be able to take part in some of the work. So quickly I'll get on to advancing electric transportation in Texas. We do different projects. For instance, we're working on the roadmap that was already mentioned with our policy advisors. We have something called compacts in North Texas and South Central Texas, where we're working with local governments as well as large employers and others to really try and push forward the electric transportation conversation. And that's where, for instance, we have Fort Worth, the Tarrant County, Dallas County, the county here, Travis County, Dallas, the San Antonio County. All of those counties have now started working on electrifying their fleets and putting in charging stations for their residents. I'm very excited about the next one. We're working on a pilot that is going to help build a pipeline of used EVs for very low-income families. And we're doing that with the city of Austin. Their fleet department, as I said, they've been doing electrifying fleets, and when they retire their electric vehicles, instead of just putting them up for auction, we're working with an affordable housing provider to actually, number one, connect those, to sell those to the low-income families, and the housing provider already has charging stations there, so that's great. And we're also working with a green bank that will help provide a loan that actually, the loan can take into account the fact that their expenses for fuel are going to be much less. So it looks like we're going to get a really great circle here, connecting up all these partners so that families with incomes of like $18,000 a year will have access to a used EV. As I mentioned, we do a lot of state advocacy, working, for instance, at the state on what a fair road use fee should be for electric vehicles. Some people there think it should be $300. We don't think it should be that high. And interestingly, there's talk at the Capitol about doing a program where, in fact, it would be based on vehicle miles traveled, which is exactly what it should be anyways. There is that working group that we got started with the state on battery reuse and recycling. And then there is a state programs called the Texas Emissions Reduction Plan that plows lots of money, I think over $100 million every biennium, into some of its electric. There is these are all the programs that are part of the TERP. There, and then the NEVI plan, which I think we're going to be hearing more about from Ryan, but the bottom line is that Texas TxDOT put together a really super plan for the $408 million that's coming to Texas for public charging. We only need 55 more high-speed chargers along our interstates to make sure that there's one every 50 miles. Then after that, there will be one put in every county seat that does not yet have one, does not have a fast charger yet. That's 190. And after that, half the money is left, and it will be allocated to the different MPOs, the Metropolitan Planning Organizations, to work with the community to figure out where they should go. This is a picture of the NEVI plan for charging infrastructure. You can see all the interstates will be covered. And this is a picture. I like this one because you can see, this is around San Antonio. You can see San Antonio's got a lot of them, but out to the west, for instance, Medina is a county that doesn't have any right now. So they're going to be adding one there. They'll be adding one in the southeast in Wilson County. So county seats are a great way to cover the rural areas of Texas. And then the federal action is pretty incredible in terms of helping the world of electric transportation along. Biden has the goal, you probably heard, of 50% light-duty sales are electric by 2030. That's a very aggressive goal. When I started working 3 years ago, the big aggressive goal that some folks out of Houston had made was 30% by 30, and now we have the Fed saying 50% by 2030, so that's exciting. The CHIPS and Science Act just passed, as I mentioned, is really going to help with putting money into manufacturing here in the United States. The IIJA, there's the NEVI infrastructure program, which is both the formula funding at $5 billion as well as a grant program at $2.5 billion. Lots of money in school buses, the battery reuse and recycling, and then ports and freight electrification. And this is the way that Atlas EV Hub, which is a really terrific data source if you're interested in data and market data, policy data about electric vehicles, they tallied up that in the IIJA, these were the totals, $50 billion for EV eligible funding. Pretty big investment. And then the IRA that was just passed in August also has a lot of help for electric transportation. There's the tax credit for both new and used, which is going to be new, and that's got Buy America, Buy North America, certain Buy North America provisions in it. There is a tax credit for commercial EVs, which is great. This one, the third one I'm really excited about, is medium duty and heavy duty incentives for local governments and school transportation providers. The charging station tax credit for both residential, and those are tax credits that will be available for folks outside of urban areas or in low-income areas in urban areas. There was enough funding in there for 100% of the post office fleet to be electrified, although I guess that's sort of political. And something that's very important for the state of Texas is the port electrification work that will help along the border. There's Green Bank funding that I'm really excited about. I know that in Texas we have the Clean Energy Fund of Texas that's just starting. There's also the North American Development Bank along the border that are both green banks that are able to really help folks trying to transition to clean energy. And it's that first one that I mentioned that's working with us on the pipeline for individuals to be able to get into them. And good timing, this is my last slide. This is just a demonstration to remind us all that change can come really quickly. The picture on the left is a picture of Fifth Avenue, where the red circle is the one car that's on Fifth Avenue. And 13 years later, from about the same spot on Fifth Avenue, same day, Easter morning, and you can see there's not a horse on it. They're all cars. So the fact of the matter is, as I mentioned in the beginning, we're beyond the early adopter phase. We're beyond the politics of it, and people are just getting it, that it makes good sense. It's good fun to drive electric, and the market is taking us there as we speak. Thank you. Yeah, that's done.
Great. All right. So up next, let's see. No presentation, right? Okay. So up next is Ryan Granger. He has been with TxDOT for almost 9 years, 4 in government affairs, 4 in transportation planning and programming, and now almost a year in strategic planning. He was the deputy project manager of TxDOT's long-range plan and now manages its strategic plan as well as co-leads the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program at TxDOT. Originally from Long Beach, California, before he came to TxDOT, Ryan worked at the Congressional Research Service at the Library of Congress for 6.5 years, where he specialized in industry, business, and transportation. So if we could all please welcome Ryan.
Great. Thanks a lot. So before I get started, I thought I would make this interactive and ask you all, how many of you own an electric vehicle? It's not entrapment. I don't have one either, but I just want to get a show of hands. So we've got one. How many of you are considering getting one for the next vehicle that you buy, or at least would consider it? Yeah, that's where I am too. Okay, and actually that's kind of been pretty consistent. When we've talked to people and done conferences about where things stand with electric vehicles, is that most people don't have them, but everybody's kind of thinking about it. And and I think that there's a lot going on in this space, and the new bill that Laura was talking about, the IIJA, which created the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, or NEVI, as we call it, it's going to bring some big changes. You saw the map that that Laura showed. I'm glad that she showed it because I didn't bring any slides today. But just to give you kind of some background on what it is that we're working on, all this came about from the IIJA, which was signed November 15th last year, and Texas got more money than any other state, $407.8 million over 5 years, and the goal of the program is really to kind of solve that chicken or the egg problem with electric vehicles, where people don't want to or don't feel like they can buy them because they're not sure of how far they can go. Can they visit grandma's house in Kansas without, with an electric vehicle? So there's a lot of range anxiety. And also on the other end of the spectrum, there are a lot of manufacturers that, would love to ramp up production, but if there's not, that kind of interest, it's difficult for them to do. So the federal government and the NEVI program really looks at trying to break that chicken or the egg situation and install tens. I think it's 500,000 chargers over the next 10 years, and all of that's really aimed at trying to address that range anxiety, ramp up production in the private sector. And hopefully, it'll be a completely, different experience driving to grandma's house in a few years if you do get an electric vehicle. So the funds are, split between the federal government and state governments, 80% federal, 20% state. It is going to allow the states to partner with private companies, third parties, to make sure that they've got that buy-in, and I think that that was pretty smart, because in a lot of other states that were early adopters of EVs, what you saw was a lot of abandonment. There were assets, that were set up, and as soon as the ROI started to dip or didn't quite pan out the way they thought, the assets were just abandoned. So the federal government, very wisely, wants people to, or wants companies to, be committed and really, be in it for the long haul and make sure that they're, committing to these. So TxDOT is definitely going to be working with private industry on this. Our marching orders from the governor's office was that we won't be owning any of this. So we're doing what TxDOT does best. We're passing the money through. We do a lot of contracting. It's we don't build as much as people think. We contract most of it. This is not going to be much different. We're going to contract it with private industry. Since about February, we have probably met with about probably 400 stakeholders from all over the state, all over the country, all over the world, and they've been from different backgrounds, from obviously EV charging companies to automotive manufacturers to that local fuel retailer down on near your corner. All of them have been interested in this program, and we've got we've had an enormous amount of interest so far. But getting back to the program itself, we decided to break this down into certain stages, and as Laura mentioned, the first stage has to be these alternative fuel corridors, which in our state pretty much line up with the interstates. So we've got 55 locations that we've plotted out along the interstates, and this is really to help make sure that the first phase of this program helps address that range anxiety that people have when they're traveling across a big state like Texas, when they're traveling across the country. And so we've got 55 of those locations planned out across the state. And once we have those built out, we'll be moving out to areas such as the 190 locations that Laura mentioned out in rural Texas, mainly in county seats. And a lot of people have asked us, why we're looking at doing that, and a lot of it just has to do with all roads kind of lead to the county seat, at least in Texas. And if you look at the map of Texas and its counties, the counties are pretty small. They're pretty much squares. They're about 70 miles apart. The spacing is ideal for this program. So when we're done with it, sometime, this program could, it could take us a while to, a year or two to actually, have, construction in the ground. But once we get started, you'll be seeing, chargers all over the state. And once we, take care of those alternative fuel corridors and take care of those rural county seats, we're going to be moving into metropolitan areas and working with federally designated metropolitan planning organizations. The MPOs are typically what TxDOT works with on road and bridge projects. They know their areas better than we do. They're usually made up out of cities and counties. So it's kind of one-stop shopping for TxDOT when it comes to that. And so we'll also be working with them to help identify the best places within their boundaries, within the metropolitan areas. So, and I forgot to mention that on this plan, we worked with, every state has to work with its energy department, which for us is the State Energy Conservation Office at the Comptroller's Office, and also its environmental department, which for us is the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. So they helped us with this, as did ERCOT, as did the Public Utility Commission. We got a lot of great feedback and lessons learned and subject matter expertise from all of those departments. So I just wanted to give a shout out to them on helping us with that. And just to kind of give some key public involvement dates, we would have liked more time to do more public involvement, to be honest. When I worked on our TxDOT's long-range plan, we went out for 2 rounds of public involvement, and each one was, a month of travel around the state. I think there were other states that were able to, do more public involvement like we would have wanted, but in a state like Texas, and under the deadline that we were under to get this plan done by August 1st, that just wasn't possible. But we did do a lot of online and virtual public involvement, and between that and all the great commentary that we've gotten from our stakeholders, we were able to put together a plan which we submitted to the federal government on July 28th. And right now that's under review. We're hoping that by next Friday we may even have that approved, but it has to be approved by the end of September. So sometime the next month, we're hoping to get more news about that. And as far as next steps go, we were really hoping to have a solicitation out for the private industry starting October 1st, but that has not happened. There have been a series of rulemakings from the feds that have come out, and that has kind of moved everything back a little bit. So what we're expecting is that, probably, come the first of the year, sometime in January, we'll put out our solicitation, and hopefully we'll hear from, get some good applications, and we're hoping that, after, reviewing those, scoring those, that, by, hopefully by, summer next year, we'll have that, executed for those 55 locations along the alternative fuel corridors. And just to give some background, I think that a lot of states were actually in a much better place than Texas was before this program came out. A lot of them had blueprints, policy, roadmaps, and things like that. Texas really didn't have any of that, and but actually, in a way, with this program, that kind of helped us. We were able to really just focus on the federal program, whereas a lot of other states had to, look at both the federal requirements and also the state requirements, and somehow kind of, meld them together. We fortunately didn't have to do that because we, didn't have any kind of a roadmap or a blueprint. But I feel like that, now that we have this plan and we've submitted it, and hopefully it'll be approved soon. Hopefully, I think that we do have a roadmap now. So it's online. It's worth checking out. We also have an interactive map. So if there's that, for those of you, or the one guy I think in the back, that has an electric vehicle, but there are places that on our interactive map that TxDOT has, where you can suggest locations for electric vehicle chargers. So, it's lots of tools that we have that, show where we're planning on putting these, and nothing is really written in stone. It's all, based off of the feedback that we get, and, and there have been lots of instances where, the public and stakeholders have said that, if you move the location for this charging station a half mile down the road, you can take advantage of this, and that'll be better. So we've listened to them quite a bit. We've taken a lot of comments from them. So if you all happen to take a look at our plan and have any comments, we'd love to hear them. We'd love to hear your comments and thoughts about where we should be putting these, especially in the metropolitan area where we really don't have that planned out at all. So this is, we've kind of taken the first step, and it's a big first step. And I think that, Laura is absolutely right that, we are kind of at the bottom of that S curve. And I think that, from here on out, the acceleration is going to be quick. I think that when we modeled it out, even on, a very traditional linear fashion, based off of, past sales and registrations, we think that the state will probably hit a million electric vehicles by about 2028 or 2030, but I think that's probably conservative. I think that we'll hit that a lot sooner. And one of the tools that we have, that we've linked to, at least on TxDOT's website, is a tool that the North Central North Central Texas Council of Governments put together. It's a registration tool where you can go and you can see all the data, in charts, in pie charts, and all kinds of good formats. You can see where all the electric vehicles are in the state, what brand, what model. You can see it by zip code, by county. And what I see when I look at that is that every time I look at it, the number has gone up, and not just gone up a little bit, but a lot. So we're really at the first early stages of this, but the more participation we have, and the more we have to work on as far as people's thoughts and subject matter expertise, the better off we'll be. So I've got cards, and I'll be here. So feel free to talk to me afterwards. If not, I'll leave cards around. I apologize again that I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but I'm kind of pinch hitting for my boss, who unfortunately got sick. But thank you for being here today, and thank you for your interest.
Thank you. Next up is Jason John Michael. Jason serves as an assistant director in Austin Transportation, where he oversees smart mobility, public-private partnerships, placemaking, mobility services, parking enterprise, and travel demand management. He leads a cross-functional team of community, mobility, technology, policy, data, and user experience specialists to deliver outcomes that improve mobility, safety, and access to Austin residents. A national leader and subject matter expert in smart cities, Jason is also an executive board member and past chairman of OmniAir, the global certification organization for vehicle communications, executive board member of the Global Autonomous Vehicle Partnership, advancing emerging and next-gen vehicle technologies, and president of the Austin Smart Cities Alliance, a local nonprofit member-based organization of public, private, academic, and individual contributors. Please welcome Jason.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Welcome to Austin, first of all. I'd like to welcome you to our favorite hometown of the United States. I like to say everybody likes to come here, and for a lot of good reasons. A lot of them are pictured right in that picture there. So as Laura mentioned, I'm doing a lot of things here at the city, and what's really interesting is seeing all the different intersectionality related to the other areas of the city that aren't necessarily in my portfolio. Housing, for instance, and the adjacency of housing and electrification and transportation are something that's very interesting to me. So as Laura mentioned, Council in 2016, I think, passed the resolution and the ordinance that set into motion our path towards electric vehicle adoption. What you're seeing here is, as Laura mentioned, I'm in charge of parking and all the parking enforcement. And so a while back, we began, as a good partner to our fleet department, testing out a lot of different vehicles. And so our staff have actually tested out some of the very first small electric low-speed vehicles. We used to use those. You've seen some of them maybe in airports or other things. They look like little stand-up trikes. That's what we started off with, and over time we noticed that the duty cycle of this type of equipment for parking enforcement, if you can imagine, is pretty tough on the vehicles. And so we actually have a lot of good data that we're sharing with our fleet partners to better understand exactly what are the things that we need in our area of our business, considering we're running around in the middle of the day, putting a lot of miles on these vehicles, doing our jobs, making sure that people are using our rights of way the way that they're supposed to. Another area, and the reason I say all this is you guys are here in Austin, right? And you're going to be here for a little bit, hopefully. Go out and see these things. because this is like a living Epcot center of electrification happening right out here. And take a scooter ride, do something to experience the electrification is what I ask. So over at Electric Drive, this is an area, a section of 2nd Street over by the old coal power plant right by Lady Bird Lake. So right there we have our very first DC fast public chargers were installed there, and we continue to use Electric Drive as a way to create experiential learning for the visitors and residents of Austin as it relates to electric vehicle and electric transportation enablement. There you'll find that we've done scooter charging docks and a whole host of other things. Be on the lookout for South by 2023. We'll be bringing back our experiential learning showcase to this area. So in the past, before the pandemic, we will usually bring our private sector partners who partner with the Smart Mobility Office to demonstrate their technologies in an open, public, free of charge environment. So that's where you can bring your kids. We're trying to get back essentially the folks that were planned for 2020 right before the pandemic. That included the Virgin Hyperloop One team. It included 3 of the FAA eVTOL teams that were working. So Bell Helicopter was one of those, for instance. And so we had a lot of different new and emerging technologies in transportation that are not available commercially yet. For people to experience. Experiential learning is the best way for safe adoption in a transportation system. Who's ridden a scooter before? Raise your hands. All right, well, more than EVs. That's good. Austin is the only free market, municipal free market that I'm aware of where scooter companies can operate. So most cities around the United States went ahead and decided to select 3. We decided to keep our marketplace open. The reason being is that electric scooters, stand-up electric scooters, the two-wheelers, they were meant to disrupt SOV drivers. They were meant to get people out of their cars. But there are a lot of other modes. In fact, about 400 electric low-speed vehicles will be entering the market in the next 10 to 15 years. What's really interesting around that is about half of them are aerial mobility devices and are not ground-related transportation. What you see here, though, is where the impact is. Why are we allowing a free market? Because Austin has one of the worst numbers as it relates to short and medium trip car market. We were the beginning of Car2Go and Zipcar and things like that here in Austin, Texas, which ultimately, while we were trying to find new and novel ways to create mobility as a service solutions, all it really did is provide more vehicles in town. With this approach, we're really beginning to see the difference. So as we track our short and medium trip segments within the city, and you can see all that right here, it's been very interesting. You can see the total number of trips there, the total distance they've went, and these are all trips that used to be done by car. We've found a way to actually filter out some of the walking trips based off of how short those scooter distances are. So we're looking at specific scooter distances that are long enough that it would likely, if it is a duplicative trip, it would have been a bicycle trip, which would have counted for the same reason and ultimately the same carbon reduction. And that's a lot, right, in 4 years, starting in 2018, January 2018. We kept our system open during the pandemic. We knew through different focus work, so my office does a lot of focus group work, and through that focus group work, we knew that most of the essential workers at the hospitals, the nurses, the orderlies, the people that keep the hospital running, were using these services, and then we were seeing during the pandemic they were going 3, 5, 6 miles on a scooter rather than the typical average of roughly 1.5 miles. Metrobike is another one of our systems here. So, electric vehicles, when I think about electric vehicles, I don't just think about a personally owned vehicle. I like to think about fleets, because if I have a personally owned vehicle and it's an electric vehicle, it's great, right? But if it's still an SOV, it's not helping the congestion issue still. And as you've probably noticed, a lot of people are moving to Austin. So congestion is still an issue for us, even post-pandemic. These new 3.0 docks, our system is built by Trek and then ran by Capital Metro now. We've partnered with Capital Metro to align this bicycle asset. This is a city-owned bicycle asset that's being run by our transit partner, which is kind of I think one of the better ways to do it from a municipally owned perspective. And with this, we tied this in with the Project Connect plan. So as Project Connect builds out, the Metro Bike system builds out with it, supplanting essentially the ability for active transportation users to better connect to our transit system of the future. Again, some scooter docks. This is over at the Electric Drive location that I was mentioning earlier. We're working with Array on some very interesting things. So as we look towards our ability to create transit enhancement functions around Project Connect, the Transportation Department went out and through authority of the city's council, we got another bond to support the other elements that Project Connect would not support, or could not support, I should say, due to their fundings. And so this involves how we're really connecting and providing shade equity and other environmental justice-related solution sets. A lot of Austin's bus stops are single-stick bus stops with no shade and concrete benches, or very unfriendly to wary humans, let's say. And so we're trying to find ways to not only give them the needed shade and support that they need. These things can charge other things. In fact, as we talk through all this, there's one thing I want you to have a takeaway from. We are still dealing with the number one and first group of range anxiety users, which are people who get around in power chairs, in power wheelchairs. So we still have to find ways to create built environment solutions within the infrastructure so that those individuals no longer have to make tough decisions at 2:30 in the afternoon of whether or not they're going to be able to maybe enjoy the park after all of their visits that they've done, but they can't because they don't have the range anymore, right? So that is an important part. And the fact that they're using the transit system out in the Texas heat, giving them some sun and maybe even a fan blowing in their face would be a great, great added addition. Now I'm going to pivot a little bit. That was all the things that we're doing here in Austin. And in the last 10 minutes, I'm going to kind of set the tone for our conversations, right? Because I like throwing out some saucy stuff, right? So transportation really is transformation, right? And we heard Brian earlier at the keynote say so well how important it is that we have the opportunity right now in front of us to change the world. It is our responsibility. We have to hold each other accountable to that. And we need to start taking action, and we need to act faster than we have been. I'm 50, and since I was in the 8th grade, I've known that point source pollution was not the big issue, right? That we could handle the smokestacks. But also in the 8th grade, they told us there's one point source pollution that we can point to that we have no idea how we're going to solve. It's called the tailpipe, right? That was 1985, y'all. And we're still here talking about tailpipes. So that tells me that action needs to happen. Where are we in that transformation? Think about it, right? In transportation, we went from calling people transportation users to understanding that there are customers. That a customer has the ability to create a bidirectional relationship with the people that are delivering the service, that a user doesn't. Then we went into digital transformation, something that Brian and I have actually spoken in Austin about quite often, related to how we're transforming the analog and somewhat human-in-the-loop related modalities and operational constructs to get better service, better efficiencies, and ultimately meet more of the demand as population grows. And then I think that while we've been looking at those, that there's a natural evolution to this next one. And it's not GHGs. It's just the little C atom, y'all. If we could find a way to get an entire transportation system's KPIs down to just carbon, then we can solve a lot of things. If we could get it down to carbon, it would help us better understand what kind of harm interstates do put on communities close to those interstates. If we could get down to carbon and we could get our traveling public to understand that, that's how we move off of the gas tax. Let me do a really quick survey. Who in here knows what the federal excise tax on gas is per gallon? Raise your hand. Only one person. What is it, sir? 18.6. That's correct. And then you add in the state taxes on top of that, right? So, and each state's different. Most people, when they gas up at a gas station, don't even get a receipt anymore. Most of them don't even know how much taxes they're paying. Heck, most of them don't know that that's how they're paying as they go into the system, right? So as we talk about going from what we're currently doing to what we have to do, those people need to be included. And that's where smart mobility offices come in, right? Because while the ITS system is running, and the things that Brian was talking about during lunch help operate the environment, the smart mobility office is the human focus, the people focus side of that, right? About changing behavior and helping people understand how to safely adopt new technologies. That human focus isn't just to the public, that's internalized inside the organization as well, right? We have a workforce that we have to develop as well. I say all those things to say that where we're at right now is at the precipice of exactly where we were in our country right after World War II, where we have an opportunity to build out a lot of infrastructure and continue to protect the homeland. Let's not forget why the interstate system was built in the first place. And we have an opportunity to do it equitably. And this is really where the rubber meets the road. We've already heard Laura mention the science that the CDC's already done and shared with us. That actually is old information now. That's over 10 years old. And you know, the image on the left there is what we espouse to. We're still dealing with rubber tires on asphalt, though. Right? As we look to electrify, we're still dealing with rubber tires on asphalt that is very close to communities, that ends up creating aerolized VOCs and rubberized particulate matter. So those are the things where we really need to work on how to better align our goals with the environment that we're trying to build. And again, we're trying to build an environment as Mike Ariano, who was originally going to be on the panel. Thank you so much, Ryan. I mean, you got to give Ryan some credit for pinch hitting the way he did, man. I tell you what. And if you ask Mike, you know, we're building what we need to build needs to be relevant in 2075, right? Infrastructure is a 50-year play. So I think Laura said it before, or one of the Lauras said it before. We got to get it right. We cannot get this wrong. A little talk around the virtuous cycle, just real quick. And this, I'm saving this for some open conversation. It's only a virtuous cycle if we can track things, know where the things go and what their second uses are. And more importantly, considering that people are buying those, it needs to have a level of privacy associated with it. We need clear regulatory environment of exactly what we can do and what we can't do as government, right? And where private sector, where that road stops and the handoff is related to validation, certification, related to these materials and other things like that. The markets, like what we're talking about right now today and what you see as far as reference implementations, they're great examples of how the market can build. But we'll need a full market, and it'll have to have a level of commodity before we get to a virtuous cycle. And we need a lot of support. Why do we need that support? Because it has to scale. You know, I had the luck early in my first career to be associated with the U.S.'s initiative towards bioremediation of landfills. So post-subtitle D landfill, you go in, you drill down into it, you shove water and air into it, and basically you overstimulate the aerobic activity, you cook a landfill down. And what that does then is you can go in and excavate that landfill, recycle everything, create what we call dillo dirt, right, which is the dirt that you can use for normal types of non-vegetable growing things, I'll say. That marketplace got started when I was a wee little engineer, right? That marketplace is just coming into the platform of productivity where every landfill in the United States is either doing this or methane farming, right? It took that long, from 1985 until now, right? So when we talk about a virtuous cycle, we just got finished with the virtuous cycle related to our household waste. Take that into account. That's the amount of work that we need to do if we're going to get to what Laura was talking about related to the New York thing. It's going to take a lot of effort. It takes all of us to do this at once. And lastly, I think this is my last slide. We need to turn this curse into an opportunity. And luckily, because of my now role here in Austin, you know, I've been here 4 years. It's been like municipal college. Before this, I was mostly at the Fed and state level. What I've realized from this is that the issue related to housing is, and thank goodness that we have an ex-mayor now as our DOT director, because he saw it as a mayor and he's putting it into action. There's two main costs in any household. That is the cost of the house or your residence and your transportation. Usually people have to pick one or the other, right? If you can afford the house, you're living further out of town, and therefore you're having a long commute. And ultimately, what you think you're saving in the house, you're actually spending on your commute. There's a way to fix this. There's a way to fix this to create insular economies within new housing programs that tie housing with transportation. Why not? We've been talking about it for a while. Why not do it? That's it. I want to save the rest for some open conversation, and my last little thing is go jump in some water. We got some great water out here. It's still warm enough, but please go and enjoy Austin while you're here. Thank you.
All right. Up next is Harley Hubbard. She is the Sustainable Transportation Manager at the City of San Antonio Office of Sustainability. Harley's work focuses on implementing transportation initiatives from the city's Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. Her projects aim to increase the adoption of electric transportation, improve air quality, and promote multimodal commuting. In addition to her responsibilities with the city, Harley is an adjunct faculty member at San Antonio College, where she teaches natural sciences courses. Harley also serves on the board of Women in Transportation's San Antonio Region Chapter. Harley has earned 3 degrees from Texas Tech University, a Bachelor of Science in Zoology, a Professional Science Master's in Environmental Sustainability and Natural Resource Management, and a Master of Business Administration. She also maintains credentials as a lead Green Associate and American Association of Airport Executives Certified member. Please welcome Harley.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, everyone. I am the 4th presenter. We are all over halfway there. I promise we will make it. All right, like Laura said, my name's Harley. I'm the Sustainable Transportation Manager at the City of San Antonio Office of Sustainability. San Antonio is just down the road, so if you get tired of Austin, come visit us. There are EV chargers on the way there. We also have electric river barges, and I would argue better tacos, but you know, that's for y'all to decide. So give us a visit.
That's for the breakout.
That's for the breakout session, yeah. All right, so just some background on the city of San Antonio. Have any of y'all ever been to San Antonio? Yeah. Did you love it? Yes, you did. Thank you. All right. So some background information on San Antonio. San Antonio adopted our Climate Action and Adaptation Plan in 2019. The major goal there is carbon neutrality by 2050. Some EV information. At the time it was adopted, we had 2,400 EVs in San Antonio with a projected 45,000 by 2030. Now we have 7,100 EVs in San Antonio, and we're projecting 80,000 EVs by 2030 in the CPS service territory, which CPS is our electric utility. Just some other information about San Antonio to keep in mind as we discuss. San Antonio has a massive digital divide. We have a very large population that is not digitally literate, does not have access to internet at home. We also have a very significant wealth gap. We have people in San Antonio that have a ton of money, and we have people that live in extreme poverty. We are a city of multiple crises going on at once. We were that way before COVID-19. We have a houselessness crisis. We have a healthcare crisis. There's a lot going on in San Antonio. So we view electrification as just one tool to making San Antonio a more equitable and more healthy city. There's definitely a lot more going on in other departments. So let's talk about the issue. In 2019, we wrapped up a study to kind of show us what the situation is in San Antonio. The darker the area, the worse it is for access to EV charging. The one that's a little red is the residential index, and the one that's orangey is workplace charging index. So as you can see, we do have a very high need for residential and workplace level 2 charging. Kind of at the beginning of our EV programs, we used to say, and it's still kind of believed, that everyone's going to charge at home. But as some of my colleagues have discussed, a lot of people don't have access to charging at home. We have to have public charging, we have to have residential charging at multifamily, and we must have workplace charging. Along with that study, we kind of looked at some of the barriers to EV adoption at the time. Like I said, these are from 2019, but many of these are still very accurate today. First off, like Laura said, upfront vehicle costs, the average cost of an EV at the time was $56,000. We are getting more inexpensive offerings, but if you're a family that has only ever bought used cars under $5,000, that's still a challenge for you. There are some mechanisms being put in place, including an EV rebate for used cars, so there's a lot of options coming up, but this is still a challenge. Also, vehicle availability. At the time, there were only 16 light-duty EV options. This one's kind of going away with all the OEMs saying that they're going to go full electric in the future. Consumer awareness. We have a lot of misunderstandings outside of just range anxiety. I used to work at the San Antonio International Airport. I drove an electric vehicle around the airfield every day. I had people ask me if it was a stick shift, if I had to get a special license for it, all sorts of different things. A very large part of my job was just me taking people to Sonic in the electric vehicle to show them that I promise it's okay. So we have a lot of misconceptions along not just the community, but also in dealers. If you go to a dealership, probably anywhere in Texas, and you say, hi, I want to buy an electric vehicle, you're gonna have to sell the vehicle to yourself. If you have any questions, dealers really have a hard time understanding just miles per gallon. That's not what it is anymore. Maintenance. They don't know. It's basically like brakes and windshields. There's just a lot going on. There's some education that we need to have going on. Next up, what I'm mostly working on is charger availability. We did not have a lot of availability at the time, but I will tell you the solutions that we've come up to this. The important part here is large sections of San Antonio had absolutely no access to forms of public charging, meaning that if you did not live in a single family home, you had no way to charge. Even talking about that, within San Antonio, 44% of residents live in a home without access to overnight charging. This includes both multifamily, and then we also have homes in San Antonio that are multi-generational and are very, very old. You could not put an electric outlet in that garage if you tried. So those people might have the means and the desire to have an electric vehicle, but they will not have an at-home charger. Lastly, equity. A lot of EV programs, especially back then, used to favor high-income households, people who had the information, the support, people who could pay for charging, people who knew how to navigate utility rates for time of use and charging like that. So we're really just trying to make this a fair game. Our first way to do that is through education and outreach. Everything we do for electrification falls under our EVSA program. So this goes under policy, education, encouragement, engineering, equity, and evaluation. This is the program that we did the study under. This is a program that's also the education and outreach portion is funded by the Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Program through, or CMAQ. That money comes through TxDOT and helps fund that program as well. That's some of our, what we like to call bad behavior funding. We're eligible for it because we are in non-attainment for ozone. Our EV charging actual infrastructure program is under this program, but it's really nice to have one brand that we can use for all of our electrification. And it's not just for vehicles, it's not just for, sedans and, light duty. We're talking about bikes, we're talking about lawnmowers, we're talking about golf carts, we're talking about garbage trucks. Everything that the city does about electrification is under this brand, and it makes our lives a lot easier because people see the stamp and they're like, oh, Harley did it, I can go ask her. And that makes my life a little more interesting, but it's better for the city. So at San Antonio, we like to lead by example. In 2010, we had an ordinance that aimed to get us a more sustainable fleet. It had no teeth. It said 17% reduction. It doesn't actually say GHG in the ordinance, and just said reduction. So reduction of what? Who knows? It did have some policy goals, which were like kind of aligned with what we were doing today. But there was no teeth. There were no processes. It was just kind of there to say it was there. We do have great partners in our building and equipment services department that manage our fleet. So we have a like 98% hybrid fleet even without this policy. We were doing really well, but we did want to go ahead and make something that aligned with our current plans. So in 2022, this year, we just adopted an administrative directive instead of an ordinance that refines the specification requirements for solicitations, aligns with all of our plans, and still allows opportunities for departments to get internal combustion engine vehicles, but they have to prove it. In Texas, everyone likes to drive a big truck. That's fine. You don't need to drive a big truck to get one person from point A to point B without hauling anything. Parks might need a big truck. That's fine. Some of our smaller departments who are just kind of traveling around the city, that's not as much of an issue. So we now have, mechanisms to set up, thou shalt get an electric vehicle unless you can prove it won't work. The goals of that policy were 1, to reduce consumption of fossil fuels, 2, improve department operational and fiscal efficiency, and 3, to minimize fleet composition for the lowest possible footprint. San Antonio is also in a unique time because we are putting all of our departments into one location. We just consolidated into one building. We used to lease a ton of different buildings throughout San Antonio, and now many of our departments are in one central spot downtown, which means we can now motor pool and carpool, which we could not do before. Different departments can share cars, which means we can right size our entire fleet, which will save us a lot of time and money in the long run. Speaking of our municipal fleet, like I said, we have great partners at Building and Equipment Services Department. They put this beautiful wrap on one of our fleet vehicles without even telling me. It was a lovely surprise, and I love it because it goes driving down the road and it's just a billboard for all of my programs. So we had 19 electric fleet vehicles procured in 2021. With that, we had 23 EV charging stations just for fleet. We also have 25 hybrid and 15 battery electric vehicles procured this year, with a projected 100 fleet EVs by 2025. Along with our policy, we also have committed to not building any more municipal gas stations for fleet. There are a few gas stations throughout the city at police departments and at, just kind of service centers that we meet up at. Everything okay? Okay, sorry, I was just checking back there. We have a few gas stations around the city. We're not going to build anymore. We don't need them. We're changing to electric. Everything's going to be fine. We're also going to right size and right type, like I mentioned before. Here's the big project that kind of we're known for in San Antonio right now, our publicly accessible electric vehicle supply equipment. EVSC is just an EV charger. We did have a competitive procurement so that this entire program was cost neutral to the city of San Antonio. We were able to do that thanks to Volkswagen mitigation funding available through TCEQ. So we basically put out a procurement and said, hey, we'll co-sign your application to TCEQ. We don't want to pay for anything though, so let us know what you can do. We did get a whole bunch of very creative business models and everything from a rebate model to a cost share, all sorts of stuff. We did end up going with Blink Charging for this partnership. They've been a great partner, so long story short, there's going to be EV chargers at 25 city sites that the city didn't really have to pay for. These sites are throughout San Antonio. Our first one, as you can see, was at the San Antonio Zoo Garage, which is a city-owned property. And there were lots of little animals there, so it made that very fun. As part of this program, we already have level 2 chargers installed at 10 city sites. The final program will have publicly accessible EV chargers at 25 city sites. All sites will be compliant with the new federal accessibility guidelines, which literally just dropped in July. This aligns, of course, with the goals in the Climate Action Adaptation Plan and our Ozone Attainment Master Plan, and our program helps meet our increasing demand for EV charging. As you can see, our forecasts are getting faster and faster, and we are trying to keep up. On the pictures to the side, we have a cute little dashboard which tells us, the reductions in CO2, oil savings, fuel saved, and total money saved, so that's fun. And these are chargers at our District 9 Senior Center. San Antonio is heavily reliant on our senior centers for all sorts of fun stuff. And that person charging is actually the Director of Animal Care Services in San Antonio. So we do have a lot of support, a lot of collaboration. I did jump up and down when I saw him there because he used to drive like a dually truck. So to see him switch over to EV and using one of the chargers I installed was great. Also part of this program, like I mentioned, the new federal accessibility standards that dropped in July of 2022. When we talk about equity, we need to talk about all users of electric vehicles, especially those who use mobility devices. Before this, there were not accessible charging stations in San Antonio at all. So if you were a wheelchair user and an EV driver, you had to choose whether you were gonna park at like a blue ADA spot or at an EV charging spot. There weren't any that accommodated both. So these new guidelines that dropped really helped provide great guidance for us. This is kind of the gist of what it'll look like. The idea is that you can completely navigate around your vehicle in a wheelchair, navigate to the charger in a wheelchair, go back and connect it to the accessible path to the building. So you don't have to choose whether you're going to use ADA parking or EV parking. You can have both. The guidelines are pretty exhaustive, which is great for us because I don't know about y'all in your states because you're not all from Texas, but we were in a very messy gray area between, some suggestions, some regulations, and it just led to there being no accessibility. And that's not how we like to roll in San Antonio. So we really do appreciate these guidelines that make everything very clear and just increase the equity of this program. All right, and that was just a very quick version of what I go through in San Antonio. I can answer any questions during the Q&A. Thank you so much for your time. I have my email address up there just in case we don't get to anything. And thank y'all very much.
All right. Up next, we have Joe Jankowski. Joe is the Director of Utility Vertical Americas at Intel. His primary role is to integrate Intel's product development teams with the broader ecosystem to solve utility's greatest challenge, to create a digital infrastructure to optimize the physical. Doing so enables greater insight into grid operations, increases the onboarding of renewables, improves safety, reliability, and security, and lowers O&M cost. He also drives Intel's utility initiatives in EV charging infrastructure. Before Intel, Joe led the development of energy management solutions and new business models for Time Warner Cable's Intelligent Home division. He began his energy career negotiating long-term power contracts at Southern California Edison, and then created the utility's strategic alliances with IoT manufacturers, including the first demand response pilot for Nest thermostats. Joe received his BA, MBA, and MPA degrees from Stanford, USC, and Harvard, respectively. Please welcome Joe.
Hi, thank you very much. As I come from the private sector, and this is the first presentation from a private sector company, this might be a little different. And the first question you might have is, what chips? We make chips. Does Intel have in, or having to do with electric vehicles? And you might be surprised if I said none. We do make chips for all vehicles, mostly in the infotainment systems. And we have pioneered making chips for autonomous vehicles, mostly keeping the cars on the road. But in terms of electric vehicles per se, there's just not enough compute power after you plug the device in to necessarily need it for that particular function. So although Tesla is a very large customer of Intel, most of that is for keeping Teslas on the road when they're in autonomous mode. That being said, we are definitely into the area of EV charging infrastructure. And that's how my tie-in with the utility sector works and why I'm here today. When it comes to EV charging, I think this is interesting that it is housed within our cities and transportation group. So Intel tends to think of EV charging more holistically than maybe other constituents up here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Oh, there's Brian, there's that legal disclaimers page. I apologize for these slides. Some of them may look like eye charts. This is probably a deck meant for a smaller audience. But what I want to point out on this slide is that holistic area that Intel addresses when it comes to EV charging is part of a much larger environmental monitoring, transportation infrastructure, education, healthcare, and public safety. And really, why is Intel in this space? Why do we care about these areas? And it's all about the data. And I know you've heard that before, but when there's zettabytes of data, and when you talk about zettabytes, everybody at Intel gets very excited. When there are zettabytes of data, then you have to have a lot of chips. And that's where Intel really, really excels and where their interest comes from. So we talk about what does it mean to deliver the next generation of transportation. I'm going to focus your eyes on the top row there about parking and EV charging, and I'm going to read this because I don't think that everybody can see it. Traffic monitoring, intersection and traffic management, and you wouldn't believe what a big part of road infrastructure is devoted to intersection management. I'm going to a conference in a couple weeks, Intelligent Transportation. Half of the conference is about intersection management. Tolling and revenue management, V2X, and V2G, of course, is a very important thing to me being the utility guy at Intel. GPS and route optimization, and incident management and response. So it's really thinking about EVs and EV charging in that larger context. And I know a lot of our public sector people have addressed that up here as well. So the rise of electric vehicles, I won't go into all of the EV trends that have been mentioned before, but when it comes to the barriers to adoption, I do want to focus on these two, cost and range. And I have my own story with this, and this is just Joe speaking on behalf of Joe, not Intel, is that when I was at Southern California Edison but way back in 2010, utilities were petrified of electric vehicles, absolutely petrified that they were going to blow transformers up all along residential streets if you had three EVs charging at the same time. So they actually tried to sort of slow it down. So in order to, put a thumb into the eye of my utility, I went out and got a Leaf in 2011, right when they started entering the states. And I got 75 miles of range on my Leaf. And I worked, I was in Los Angeles, 35 miles away from the company. So I had 70 miles that I had to cover every day, and I had 5 miles left over. So talk about range anxiety. And in the summer in LA, going through the San Fernando Valley, 100 degrees is not unusual. So I was literally sweating it out on the way home. Figuratively and literally, because if you turn your air conditioning on in an EV, your mileage drops way down. So the reason I say this is because I think that range anxiety is, and this is just me speaking, wildly overblown in this country. I don't think we necessarily need 400 miles of electric range, especially when the government is putting every EV charging stations every 50 miles. But as Americans, we like the wide open road. We like to be able to get in our car immediately and drive 400 miles at a clip, even though, I think was mentioned before, 95% of our driving is 40 miles or less in a particular trip, and a large percentage, I think the average is 40 miles per day. So, and the interesting intertwined other factor here is the cost. The majority cost in EVs is the battery. So as we keep saying we want to lower the cost of these electric vehicles, we can make a $20,000 electric vehicle now. It's not going to go 400 miles. But do we really need that for 95% of our trips? What are the alternatives? You might have another car in your garage that is not an EV. If you're planning on driving 600 miles away, maybe you rent a car for that trip. These are the kind of things that we should really consider when it comes to that interplay between cost and range, because I think a lot of people assume that the battery cost is going to follow this Moore's law, and it's just going to keep getting less and less expensive over time. I don't necessarily believe that. I think that the rare earth metals that are required for EV batteries are getting harder and harder to mine, harder and harder to find, and may be relegated to certain countries that might not be willing to share them with us in the near future. So I would be a little bit leery on that Moore's law for EV batteries. So that's my range and cost soapbox there. This is where Intel believes, or where we actually have our chips into the EV charging infrastructure. And think of the blue box at the top as being the EV charger writ large, meaning it's an EV charger with a large screen attached, as many of the EV chargers in the future will be, because advertising is going to be a huge component of paying for these. And these are all level 3 chargers, so level 3 public charging stations. And that, by the way, this is what Intel is building towards. Because when there's the power conversion and the power quality consideration of EV chargers is taken into account, level 3, then you do need a lot of compute power. And especially when you have a string of these, like you do on Tesla roadway stops on the highway, where they have 8 or 10 different Tesla chargers, power quality is a real issue there. It can wreak havoc on the grid, all those cars charging at once, going up and down with their energy flows. So on the right side of this, there's 3 different components here. And on the right side of the blue box is really that advertising and visual and video aspect, so that when somebody comes up to a level 3 EV charging station and they want it, and the owner of that wants to know what kind of ad to hit them with, they can get a visual, a generic facial recognition to know that that's a person that might prefer, a pair of Dockers versus, being directed to get a Starbucks coffee. On the left side of that blue box is really where the power electronics is contained. And this is where Intel really shines. And I'll tell you we'll get into that a little bit later. And then the green box is the third area, and this is where that large bank of EV chargers at a rest stop or a charging, I'm going to say petrol station or gas station, soon to be turned into an EV charging station, connects to a microgrid, which is then connected to the grid. So the computing needs of a typical charger, and again, I'm going to talk about the services. I'm going to talk about dynamic advertising and digital signage, energy management and load balancing, the user interface, the payment facilitation, a digital in-use indicator. These are the areas where, with level 3 charging, you are going to need to take all into account. It's not a level 2 charger that's a small box sitting at your house. I used to have one of those. This is a big, complicated machine that has more benefits than just charging your car. And we're going to need that as we roll out these into road infrastructure applications. Now, this is where Intel, I'm going to talk about that power conversion part. And Intel has been pioneering this in terms of putting FPGAs into the EV chargers. The current generation of FPGAs on the right-hand side, we're moving to that, where you have smaller inductors, smaller capacitors, and that's being pioneered now. And the reason for that is that they're cheaper, they're more efficient, and they have a smaller footprint, which in an urban area, having that smaller footprint is actually pretty important. I think I have a video here. I don't know if I can show it or not. No, I can. Just to break it up. There's no sound.
No, I don't think they hooked up the sound.
Okay.
Oh, does it?
Narrate.
Yeah.
Narrate.
Voiceover.
This is really, they're more efficient, they're more compact, they're figurable, they're cost effective. I think that we actually worked with a company called Imagine Energy, that creates the next generation of DC-FC charging stations. And the important consideration here is using silicon carbide, which is a new technology for this application, and also combined that with FPGAs, and just making these 5 times smaller, increasing the efficiency to 99% with 30% lower cost. We have a 10-page white paper on this, which I can certainly steer you towards. But basically, it's breaking up the power electronics into a transformer, which can then serve a variety of number of the actual chargers that each one of them have a charging gun to. So it's configurable, and by making that one-to-many approach, it's much less cost. You don't have to have an inverter for each charger. There was some really cool music to this. I'm sorry I can't narrate that. Here is one of the EV charging stations of the future, right, where there's going to be a 6-foot screen, and companies are actually going to be able to make money of these, and therefore private companies are going to be able to pay for them. That's one thing that we really haven't talked about. Who's going to pay for all these chargers? It can't be government. Government can kickstart this process, as they've been very able and willing to do with these new acts, but that's not going to scale it, right? I mean, you're going to have a way to get these companies out there so that they can make new revenue streams. They're not going to make money on the electrons. That's a commodity, and that's largely controlled by the utility. So I think that's the end of it. Well, maybe it's not. Again, Intel loves its zettabytes, so you can see the zettabytes all going through the laptop computers there. And I think I might just end it there. All right. So how does this relate to really my passion is modernizing the grid? We talk about infrastructure, and we haven't really talked about that much here today. The grid cannot handle. If we had the number of EV chargers that everybody would like to have, that everybody's planning on having, the cities, the states, the multiple states are getting together to form interstate highway corridors. If we had all that today, it wouldn't operate. The grid's not ready for it. Now this is sort of a simplistic look at the grid, but we have here power generating going from left to right, power generation, the generation substations, of which there aren't that many, transmission substations. But if you can see this intersection here where the red dot is, these are distribution substations. This connects everything. This connects the DERs like solar, wind, and batteries, utility scale batteries. This connects your commercial, residential, and industrial customers. This connects connected workers out in the field, not just utility workers, but all kinds of workers who are going to be working along that corridor. And this is sort of the linchpin of where we need grid modernization. So this is the area that I and my team focus on at Intel. And when we talk about grid modernization at a substation, we're getting into an area that probably is not EV transportation, but it's enabling EV transportation. At the substation, the picture on the left is a current substation, and you can see the racks and racks of fixed function devices from mainly 5 companies, okay? GE, Siemens, Schneider Electric, ABB, and Schweitzer. And these 5 companies pretty much control all of the hardware that goes into those and the applications that go into charging stations. What Intel is doing, and we have done at a number of utilities worldwide, is taking all of those fixed function devices, putting them onto commodity servers and putting them onto one rack. And this is at Southern California Edison here, where we've taken that entire bank of fixed function devices and put them onto a rack of 3 servers. Okay? Much cheaper, much more efficient, ties all of those fixed function devices, applications together in one place, and from that rack, we can virtualize it back to the utility data center. Obviously a reduction in costs. a reduction in O&M and a reduction in I'm going to actually say, cybersecurity threats, because now it's a data-centric rather than a hardware-centric problem. The value proposition for this is from Salt River Project, another utility in Arizona, where they talked about the devices, the reduction in the number of devices and the reduction in the O&M costs were 50% and 76% respectively. So this is the way to get to substation automation. Interestingly enough, this was all done in the telecom sector 20, 30 years ago. This is not new science. It's new to the utility industry, and it is largely because of those 5 companies having an oligopoly over, I can't believe I used that word, I haven't used that word since grad school, an oligopoly over utilities, the utility sector. And it's one we're trying to break. So we've been working with companies like Dell, okay? A standard, what we call COTS, commercial off-the-shelf server, to take application software from one of those 5 proprietary companies in the oligopoly and put it onto a Dell server and put this into a substation. So this is happening. So with this happening, I'll just sort of conclude here, is by making these changes in the grid infrastructure, you're going to get a lot more level 3s being able to even be on the highways in this country. Not only that, these are going to be charged more and more by renewables, wind and solar. Wind and solar are so intermittent, they wreak havoc on the grid too. So we have to do this grid modification, or grid modernization, even more so to enable more renewable generation onto the grid, just as much as we do for level 3 EV chargers. And so this is sort of this, let's tie it all together attempt that Intel is trying to make. I mean, if we're not necessarily in an EV doing a charging function, we are charging the infrastructure to enable that to happen. So I think I'm ending there. There we go. Thank you very much.
All right. Up next is George Liang. George is the Director of Product and System Application Engineering for Switching Power and Battery-Powered Applications at Infineon Technology American Corporation. He leads an engineering team with a focus on system power solutions for smartphone, PC, data center, telecom network, battery energy storage systems, EV charging, renewable energy, and motor drives. Prior to joining Infineon, George was the Director of Application and System Engineering for PMIC products in automotive, industrial, computing, and communication applications at Integrated Device Technology until July 2018. Prior to joining IDT in May of 2015, George had worked at Intersil Corporation since November 2000 and held various engineering and business leadership positions for a broad range of power management IC products. Prior to joining Intersil in November 2000, George was the R&D manager and power architect at Hart Interface for AC/DC and DC/AC power supplies for RV, marine, and renewable energy applications. George Liang has extensive R&D and marketing experiences on various semiconductor products, including analog and digital controllers for isolated and non-isolated DC-DC power converters, PFC controllers, switching regulators, integrated power modules, PMICs, LDOs, MOSFET drivers, hot plug, and O-ring control products. He is the inventor of 12 U.S. international patents and the author of over 40 technical papers. He received his PhD in electrical engineering from Chongqing University, China in July of 1995. Please welcome George.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to and share with you some of my observation today. I'm quite very happy to see a state supposed to be resource rich, study really put lots of program on the EV charging, also renewable energy system. It's a really big surprise for me. I come from California. I always think about California as a leader to drive the adoption of the EV charging, EV car. I don't know the exact reason. It could be because of the 1 year ago we have this severe weather condition, caused so much problem and disruption of utility system, or because of the actual relocation of some company moving manufacturing to the Austin area, also design center Austin area. But I'm very happy to see the change. So thanks for inviting me come here talk about the EV charging. A little bit background about Infineon. And Infineon is about 58,000 people in the semiconductor industry. It's one of the largest semiconductor company. We are the number one for power semiconductor device. We're also number 2 in terms of microcontroller for the various application, not just the Intel CPU based, regular controller ARM-based for any application. And I want to share some of the material we had back in July. We had in Vienna, we had a large sales conference. We discussed the application for various applications. First one is renewable energy, and also talk about EV charging, electrical car as part of the discussion. And if you look at how the market we service, we have products being used for electrical vehicles. We work with many of the partners in electrical vehicle industry. We're also working with the charging system providers as well for various applications. In terms of infrastructure for the power grid, it's also one of the field. We have lots of history work with multiple customer. So when we look at this EV charging market, I want to give you an overview about how we look at this market trend and how we can address as a company provide the solution to various customers, also contribute to the global effort to decarbonization in the earth. So first thing you look at the projection of the electrical car. You look at the number of the car just based on what I heard today from the Beverly's talking about some notorious progress in adopting EV car, and talking about here about John's talking about many programs going on the Austin City. And then you talk about what I actually heard from Nori, talk about state program. I can see that the adoption of the electrical car will be even faster than what we projected. 200 million in 2030 can be even faster than that. If you look at, we look at our charging point, 3 million. Reality, I think, is going to be bigger than that, especially if you look about charging at home, residential charging. And there are 2 driving factors. First is the lot of demand because of electric cars usage require a big charging station. Also because of the requirement for longer driving range, resulting in more power required for charging station. At the same time, to enable fast charging or much shorter charging time, we really need to advance technology as well. So technology needs to be ready. And that means we need to be not just efficient, but also have the capability to provide everything we need to have a smart grid, have more optimized energy delivery system for the Intel grid or for the charging station for the users like an electrical car. If you look at how the charging system will require for the reliable and high efficient charging for a car. So first thing you look at, we need a very good grid. I'm very happy to say Joe was talking about Intel's effort on this space. Really, this is one field that needs collaboration with multiple companies and also multiple industry, close collaboration from the digitalization of the data to transforming the data, but also come back to the power delivery side. We look at how important to have renewable energy as a source and the local charging station. So when we did the analysis, look at what happened to today's charging station, most of them, 90% of them, have renewable energy on site. Many reasons you have well-established utility grid. When you install a charging station, you don't want to create huge disruption for utility grid, because upgrade utility transmission line require huge investment. That's not practical. So that means renewable energy has become a big portion of the charging system. And then come back to how we're going to charge a car. So look at the charging a car. There's multiple ways to charge a car. A car can be charged when you plug in at home, your IC outlet. But that can take a very long time if you are not install specific charging box, you're going to take like 11 hours. Install a charging box, you increase power capability to charging a car at the house. Then you can reduce the time maybe to 6 hours. Then if you look at, well, in the future, we also need to look at the charging station. Really, you don't want to have wire connection to the utility grid, so you need a contactless charging, like a wireless charging through air. But I do expect that wireless charging through the air will take some time to be materialized. Meaning similar like we have this smartphone wireless charger. It's nice to have, but it's also a challenge when you think about need to determine foreign objective. You need to make sure when have someone standing in the pad is not going to cause any problem to human being. Another thing, if you look at in the right side, we look at the DC box charging. DC box can be small, so it can be big. When you have a small DC box, anytime DC charge higher voltage, charge the battery directly, so you can really reduce the charging time. The high power charging, because the amount of energy can deliver short time, the charging time will be reduced. So if you give an example, look at the charging time. If we assume we have an electrical car, has a battery capability of 100 kilowatt, if you only have 20 kilowatt wall box charging capability, it's going to take you 5 hours. But if you double the capability of the charging station, you can reduce the time from 5 hours to 100 minutes, and ultimately it can be 70 minutes. So really the charging capability of a charging station have huge impact on the charging time. Ultimately, the ideal cases you have a car can be charged in a quiet time, but also not create too much burden to utility. So let's look at the composition of the charging based on the system requirement. So if we only have a car, you need a charging station, not many people are close by, not many want to use that charging station. You can have a 20 kilowatt charging station, take 2 hours to charge in a car. That's typically can happen for the charging station really don't have too much power supply. Can be a station doesn't have renewable energy available, and utility grid already outdated. You cannot change the utility grid. But if you look at the commercial high power charger, in a office place outside of your parking lot, you may be able to have higher charging capability. You don't want your employee waiting for the charging spot available. You really like to have a higher capability. That means that person will help you speed up the charging time, increase the power to a much higher level, like highway charging station. They really require you charging very fast. You can move on your next trip. You can reduce the time to your destination. So look at the trend. The number of the high power charging station will naturally have a higher percentage. The low power version will likely reduce over time. So let's look at the cost because of the charging demand. So if you think about you charging an electrical vehicle and using a very low power charger, it takes only longer time. But the good sense, longer time is longer, but the power requirement is low. So you can use that for your residential charge at home. And when you drive to home, you park in your car and just charge it overnight. But once you increase the power to be able to charge in very high power, very short time, up to like 7 minutes, then your power demand is significantly increased. It's more like 100% increase. So utility grid cannot be able to handle that. To do that, we need to look at how we're going to address this from power delivery kind of view, and look at how we be able to look at the local energy source, not just look at the energy source from utility. So here I show you a complex energy flow system, looking at the usage of the energy path from electrical grid to the EV car, also from a battery storage system to the EV car, and so from the solar power panel to the EV car. So here there's 2 points I have to mention here. First, fast DC EV charging, that's the direction the industry is going, and it's going to be even faster because of the high demand for shorter charging time. The second one is EV charging with integration to other systems. So sometimes you want to look at how the electrical car looks like. It's a moving dynamic energy storage element right? Energy storage system. In the case you have power utility grid shut down for many reasons, because the utility crash, because of the unexpected weather situation, or wildfire, then you still have this battery bank store enough energy in your car. So that can be used to power up your household. May not be necessary for washing machine, but is certainly good enough for your refrigerator or lighting. So that means bidirection is required for the car, so you can charge the battery of the electric vehicle, but also electric vehicle can be used as resources to power your house. In that case, bidirection is really required. If you're looking at the typical two kinds of a power delivery system, one we call bidirectional. Bidirection is ideal for the application. You don't have so much energy can be supplied from utility grid in a short time. And we also, in actual usage, your use case for the charging station is not always in high demand. In that case, bidirection is necessary. You use a battery in the car as an energy storage, but you also can charge that. You charge it in the daytime, then you use it in the evening time, or charge in the evening time in the daytime. Really help you balance your totally operation of the utility grid. Unidirectional is good for very high power charging. And the reasons to say that is that unidirectional, you don't need to have this complicated charging system. You charge it from AC to DC, and you from DC directly charge charge your car. So you remove a couple of stages for the power conversion. Then you can be high power, but also can really save the reduced power loss during this charging flow. Next, I want to show you how this energy charging system can be integrated. When we talk about the charging as a system, we want to use energy source in the car, and also want to charge the car as a system. We usually call this, we call the embedded system, but required bidirectional. This is really a trend. We see that happening over the last few years, now become even more popular. The real reason, like I said, the weather situation, the power line down, wildfire, make this become an immediate need. I think the challenge is when you have energy uses and kind of like home appliance from the house, you also have the solar power from the utility, but you have a connection to the utility grid as well. How are we going to make sure we have a flawless power flow, especially from a battery in the car to your refrigerator, right? So that requires bidirection. But bidirection also means we need to have a network. So we call this one need an interface to link the source and the nodes together. How to link a source to a node together? The best way is really have a grid. This grid can be AC grid. In the case of AC grid is well established, it's totally available. So very easy system connection wise. This industry has been existing for many years, have well defined from specification to actual hardware for safety. But the one problem of this is really efficiency is not very high. If you think about some of the node for the system really is the DC load, for example, computer. In fact, computing, the end of the computing really can be just DC voltage, very low DC voltage. So in some cases, DC interface is actually working better. The DC building concept, the industry talked about many years ago for data center. Now I think it's a time to relook at, especially have the new renewable energy available, plus the advancement of battery technology, plus advancement of power conversion technology. It's a time to look at the DC bus for the data center, even for from the large data center to small enterprise data center. So we look at what needs to be done in order to make sure we have a very good efficiency when you deliver power from utility grid to the EV car to charge the battery. Also talk about how we can reduce the size of the charging system. One of the important things happening is we need to use a new device. And the traditional device has this limitation, especially switching frequency. When we talk about large scale power infrastructure, we use the IGBT. So usually that technology has been over 20, 30 years now, and can only switch in like 20 kilohertz and below. So that means we really need to have a newer device, wide bandgap device, silicon carbide. It's one device, can be really used. I think Joe touched that. It's good to see you have also this program in place. It's really the teamwork, I think, can make the huge difference. From the power side, when we look at how silicon carbide will change the industry as a device, first, the power delivery efficiency will be increased about 2% from battery side because of the capability to, the device has really, as nobody doubt, allow you switching faster, also can reduce switching losses. As a result, you can deliver for the same kind of a power level, you can reduce the power loss, increase efficiency, really energy saving. And in essence, for renewable energy, using a device like silicon carbide or gallium nitride device, we can also make the device smaller. So for the same size of the box, same box, you can put more power circuit, more capability inside the box. As a result, you can double the capability to charging your charging station, especially when you have base limitation. And back to the charging the car, because of the increased capability of the charging station, you can also reduce your charging time. So this is really one factor driving the whole industry. And as a company focus on power device, this is one area we invest in that. We have our peers also focus on that on the gallium nitride device, also with a silicon carbide device. I'd like to talk a little bit about the staff by the power. I heard earlier Joe talking about how Intel addressing this connected smart grid, how what information need to transfer from the charging station to the cloud using the Intel processor or Intel IC device as an ecosystem. But essentially, it's very important to have a connection for charging station to a cloud server. So that infrastructure communication is a must. Each component sorting helps a lot. Process data locally, reduce the burden to hyperscale data center. The second thing, we need to have a system control and a metering. Precision metering is so important. The electrical is not free, even though electrical charger, the energy usage is probably more efficient than using gas, more economical, but it's not free, so you have to pay. In order to make sure you have an accurate pay, you need to have a good monitoring function, metering function, have the right control as well. You need to have a good user interface. The time you walk to a charging station, you want to have this user-friendly. You want to be able to be detected because the radar sensor detects you are available. You want to be able to communicate. So that user interface is also important as well. And vehicle-to-vehicle communication between vehicle to the charging station also important. Sometimes you can even using the infrastructure to diagnose the health of the battery in the electrical vehicle. So there are many things can be done, and really the pay of the power. So as a company, we also look at this. Well, if you look at what's important, what needs to be connected from the charging station to the internet and the smart grid, your payment back-end service that's required, the pay. You want to make sure you pay and the proper amount because of the meter is accurate, but also want to make when you make a payment, your personal information is not going to be stealed by someone. So security is becoming important too. So those communications are also always necessary and also needed. Just our own IC is not going to be sufficient. All the Wi-Fi communication bring the data from the charging station to infrastructure is not going to be enough. So that's why I think the edge computing helps, and then communication on the network side also helps. It's really the teamwork from multiple industry, and we're working together to make sure we have a very competitive, reliable solution for the EV charging. I want to talk a little bit about why this control is important, why we have isolation interface. When you talk about power, especially high power, high voltage or IC, DC voltage, the safety will be included. So usually we have isolation related to safety. Also have isolation related to, from the user side, also connection side, don't want to make sure you have any interruptions. So data transfer, data communication needs to be very reliable. We also have to make sure data is secure, safe. This is actually a good example why system control meter are very important for the EV charging application. I want to show you, this is what I talk about isolation one. I want to show you one more stuff about user interface. User interface is really a result of multiple function circuit inside. You can talk about sensing circuit, environment sensing, radar sensing. And then you talk about how the sensor can be processed locally, Also, you need to have some function related to payment, something related to how you handle that. So user interface one really, it's also an area. There's many companies invest a lot to make user interface more friendly, easy to use, and more secure. I want to mention to one very important thing as a security concern. I think earlier we talked about cybersecurity is one big concern, the interruption of utility grid through an EV car. That can be very dangerous. Also, if someone tried to break the grid and if anything happens to the grid, it also can cause a crash. To do that, we need to have a very reliable solution. And the good thing is the company like Infineon, also a couple other companies provide a very reliable solution. When you make a payment using your chip card, you have you must have Infineon IC inside. But important thing, you have a contract certification, you have a charger certification, server certification. You also have service certification. There's many certifications needs to be in place. In this way, when you make payment, you don't have to worry about someone's personal information. You don't have to worry about the information, the payment is not correct. So this we call the secure EV charge system using security controller. And that's how important to have a secure EV charging, because it's meaning of private information, also system readability associated with the EV charging. The last one I want to show you a completed system with the EV charging network. This is really a recap some of the discussion I have earlier, right? Number one, since energy efficiency is the key for EV charging, we want to make sure we don't waste too much energy during the charging, so make good use of the power come from either utility grid or solar panel or from wind power. Now require high efficiency, require higher power converter, high efficient power converter with new topology, require new structure of the charging setup, charging inside the circuit, also require newer device. So that's one important one. Another one, bidirection is really the way to go. I think now we are in early stage of wide option of a silicon carbide device. I expect this will grow rapidly. Eventually, I think we will have a very high efficiency bidirection solution can be used, installed at home, at a commercial building, or many places. So, and another thing is important, to have a scalability is important, and security is important too. This really, I snapshot the overview about as a company like Infineon or our competitor, our peers, try to address the growing issue in the EV charging market, the large scale EV charging network. Make sure you have a reliable EV charging station, reliable EV charging network, and never break and never being hacked by someone. So that's the end of my presentation.
Great, thank you. All right, thank you so much to all of our panelists for your presentation. We're going to take a break right now, and then we will come back for the Q&A. So please, Sarah, how much time do we have? Great, about 15 minutes. Yeah, and then come back and let's ask some questions. So we're excited to hear your thoughts and feedback and questions, and I'm going to take some moderator rights and ask my own questions too. So see you shortly.
Thank you. What time is it?
It is 3:35. Yeah.
Great job.
Great job for you. I want to talk to you a lot more.
What is your role in this, besides being the moderator?
So I'm going to do the keynote tomorrow morning
Okay.
about my organization and what we're doing.
What's your business like?
So I work at the Ray. I'm the deputy director.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Do you know the Ray?
I don't.
Okay, so we're a nonprofit organization,
Okay.
and we are headquartered in Atlanta. We work with GDOT on an 18-mile stretch of Memorial Highway to build out, a test bed for sustainable net zero technology for transportation. So we are working for net zero transportation.
Great. Very cool.
And
Thank you.
we are buddies with Jason and Mike at TechStot, and we do a ton of work. We've been scaling across the U.S. to help transportation agencies do their own net zero projects.
Okay.
So much so that we're changing our travel demand management office into our net zero office.
I heard you say that. That's impressive.
And what do you do on the 18-mile stretch of highway? I mean, that's not a very big stretch. Are you putting charging in the ground or, in the roadway?
So we're building Yeah, so we
Okay.
have, so our nonprofit started in 2015. And, over the first 5 years or so, we were able to onboard about 10 projects. We're now up to over a dozen. So we have like connected vehicle infrastructure. We work with Panasonic on that. We just added Kia and Hachi into the phase 2 work for freight signal prioritization.
Freight signal prioritization.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because the Kia plant is right there at exit 6. We have a megawatt of solar at exit 14.
That's
we
great.
have an EV charging station that's also supported by solar. We have a rollover tire safety check station. We do rubber modified asphalt. We have a whole landscape laboratory where we're trying to figure out ways to use non-chemical weed mitigation so that we can mow less and also draw down more carbon.
Oh, it's very comprehensive.
Yeah,
That is
very
impressive, yeah.
comprehensive.
I have a friend who's
Yeah.
an invasive weed professor at Fort Collins at
Yeah.
Colorado State. You went into what? Invasive weeds?
It's a
You got a
problem.
PhD in that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
All right.
Yeah. And then with our partners, we can expand outside of what we're doing on the Ray because obviously in Georgia, it's not going to be the same
Yeah.
in every area.
Is your utility Georgia Power?
Georgia Power is our utility and they own the right-of-way solar that's on the Ray.
Okay.
But we've also been doing a lot of work in right-of-way transmission. And we're doing that work with Minnesota DOT, but
What does
also.
that mean, right-of-way transmission?
So you'll know this, and this is why.
Actually, I'm not sure
I
I
wanna
do,
talk,
but go
I want to
ahead.
talk to you.
Yeah.
So we haven't built significant interregional transmission in this country for
Oh,
about 25
transmission,
years.
like electric.
Like electric
Okay,
transmission.
got it.
For
Big
about
wires.
25
Big
years.
wires, we've got
Yeah.
those, yeah, we've got those in West Texas, bringing in our solar, yeah.
They're really important.
Very
Really
important.
important. We can't onboard renewable energy like the MISO region, which is the Midwest. They were only able to accept 5% of the renewable
Yeah.
energy projects.
Yeah.
That's a huge
Are you familiar with
problem.
the,
So tight, right?
with
Yeah.
the CREZ lines, the CREZ system that was built here in Texas? Because when the folks were getting winds and solar started, they're like, we know we're not gonna be able to get it
Oh,
from
yeah,
West
yeah, yeah.
Texas to here. And so they invested $1 billion and now it's oversubscribed because that's how
Yeah.
much it's blown up. But yeah, that's a huge, huge part of the system
it-
that
you
makes
know,
renewable
And
work
that's
here.
the increase in steel and cement.
Yes, a lot of it, and
Yeah.
big wires, and you drive out in West Texas.
Yes,
and see these
they
things.
can't
What's
hear.
interesting is though that
Okay.
you get, so dollar for dollar, you're
Okay.
putting in steel and cement for
Oh,
those
great.
transmission.
Yeah.
But then
I will
the
pull up
digital
the chat.
infrastructure can make better use
Great.
of
Oh,
that.
yeah, because it shows right up.
Steel and cement.
You mean to make it efficient?
Yeah.
Yes.
They were great. I want to talk to everybody. Can I leave these? I can leave the chat up.
Yeah, I know, I was too, that's why I saw that.
Thanks for the presentation, very nice.
Yeah, yeah. I have a question suggestion for you. A word that
Yeah.
that George mentioned at the end was that I was thinking about, hey, we need to talk about this reliability of charging stations.
Yeah.
Because they're not reliable. Everybody's talking about
Right.
these great systems, and they're working at about 70% of the time. And
Right.
the feds in the NEVI program are requiring a 97%. So the question is, how's that gonna happen?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we
That's
need
a good
to-
one.
Yeah.
Okay. You're so right. You're so right. It's an issue. What? What?
And little pastries.
Yeah, it is.
No, it's just if I leave any later than 5:30, it's gonna take me like 3 hours to get home. Yeah. But it can be an hour and a half.
When I first moved here,
45 minutes. People are cool about it.
Eric Televoto with Louisiana DOT stuff. Good to meet you. It's actually 18 where my tangent there for a minute. but it-
good heat shrinking process going on there.
Yeah.
It's gonna go everywhere.
I know. That's hilarious.
we're doing the
Okay, I
same
gotta
thing, we're
say.
doing a grant thing, but did you use the
There we go, there we go. Okay. We're smart.
You know, I read that.
You want me to figure out the shortest way?
Just remove me from people there. That whole thing is set up.
You lost it anyway.
Delivery of publicly owned infrastructure like we've always done it. You're gonna go put a package together, they put it out for advertise, you can go low
So you're at the
bid,
airport before?
and you know,
It's a city-owned airport, so. Yes.
Very cool.
And there's sustainability there.
How long you been in the city?
4 years.
From San Antonio?
I have family in San Antonio. I'm from El Paso.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. Sustainability airport was interesting because they just had me there to say they had a sustainability person. They didn't actually want it sustainability. And then Austin Airport slowly started poaching our people,
those rulemaking laws,
which
that's
was
what,
hilarious.
we don't want to go
Because they took all the good ones.
that whole thing, because they
And I
have
made them move
provision
them.
in there, it's
Awesome
one
sustainability.
twenty C or whatever,
I still work
12C
with the
or
airport
something. I can't
occasionally.
remember it now, the provision in
their,
Title 23, but
Electric ground support equipment,
you know,
stuff like that.
we want to accept grant applications, evaluate
here
those
for you.
grant applications, and deciding who gets an award.
Yes,
Cost
for
is
some
gonna
of
be
them.
one factor
Yeah, yeah.
of equipment. Obviously,
not bad.
location has to be a factor,
municipal
DVE participation has to be a factor, Justice 40 has to be a factor.
My work was
not
a lot
low
of
bid.
bid, so I worked,
You know, I mean,
early in my career, I worked on,
I mean, everybody, at least my thinking is the grant application, you're gonna have to have a quote in there for utility company, what's it gonna take to provide adequate power, which is probably the
Yeah.
vast majority of the cost.
really important.
Second is,
So I got to work on all that kind of stuff for a long time.
you're gonna have a quote from somebody who's gonna install the equipment, provide and install the equipment, where's your quote for that?
Then I got into
Is there a separate quote for somebody who's gonna maintain it for you and, collect fees, are you gonna collect fees, that kind of thing.
my whole retirement goal is to come out with a whole lot of intellectual property instead of so much.
Yeah. Yeah, I started in the Senate before everything in its state. I was like,
I've already done that.
Senate's kind of like state and federal put together. It's fine. There you go.
Nice.
You have a little charcuterie board.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, I'm not hungry right now, but like, I gotta put them in the bag because
Yeah.
I'm always late. I always pick the flights that are like 45-minute layover in Atlanta, you know? So it's like, they're never in the same terminal. I don't know if y'all have been to Atlanta lately, but it's like,
Oh,
I had a similar
You're
experience
coming
in
from-
Denver recently.
same. Like, you take the train in between, but I hate taking the train.
They put that
Otherwise,
in
I don't get any
NPR,
exercise.
that, oh, well,
Also, have you ever walked, like, if you've been to Atlanta,
P3s,
walking in
okay.
between the terminals, have you
we've
done
done
that?
P3s with toll roads.
I remember, so my first flight,
What am I gonna have, a
Was on a
P3 contract
Eastern-
with
no,
a 7-Eleven to
TWA
put in an EV charging
flight.
station, are you kidding?
Atlanta Hartsfield, direct to Taipei.
How long was that flight?
I don't know, it was
14
like,
hours.
itsy bitsy baby. My brother had been even born yet. No, what, yeah, he was the one after. That was our first one. That, they didn't even have a train. You had to run.
Yep.
And they didn't even have jetways. You had to go outside.
Yep.
And walk across
Didn't
the
matter if
continent.
it rained or not.
Yeah, we were the last people on the plane. On that one. That was fun. It was really interesting. I've been able to, and of course, since we were kids, we got all the little fun kid things
Yeah.
too. So we still have all those.
It used to be fun to fly as a kid. Especially those overseas flights. I flew from like Texas to Hawaii and Germany. It was so fun.
Yeah, if they ever have back then they would still have like open
Yeah.
first class seats. And I
Yeah.
always put a kid in the first class seat. I always thought I was like something
And my
that
mom was
always
smart.
happens
She
to
would
me.
always just put me in footy pajamas. She's like, no shoes, footy pajamas. Yeah. It's fine, run around.
All the while, we have to get federal approval.
I just fly TWA, I fly Eastern.
I just want to give it a war, to have a contract basically built around whatever.
Because we were always,
the quotes they give me.
my mom's side of the family is from Mali, which is just south of Taipei. But because my two uncles were pretty popular in the community and they were both doctors, I forget
So they sided with, you know, the Han, because we're Han, so they sided with the blood side of the thing. Chinkashek, of course, was, you know, getting rid of that, you know, sort of bloodline kind of way of leading the country. And so they had to leave. They were on the list to be imprisoned. And so they left and fled to originally Paraguay. And so we would fly to Paraguay and visit them in the 80s. That's where my grandmother was and all that. So it used to be we'd fly to Taipei to see them, and then all of a sudden we'd fly to South America. And then they went bebopped from Paraguay to Uruguay, back and forth, started up their medical practices again in Buenos Aires after the Chinese government quit looking for them, honestly.
They were actively looking for him?
Yes.
Wow.
Because they were political activists.
All the bureaucracy to this, but still expect this
Yeah.
quick delivery, like you said. It's
Yeah,
just-
yeah, it's
And
coming
then I
up.
think a lot of people who are interested in hosting sites in the private sector.
And now it's kind of weird. So my dad's American. He was
Bureaucracy and nonsense.
in Korea and Vietnam. He was air traffic special, so air traffic control and all that sort of stuff. He wicked rad skills. I mean, in the 30s, the guy could basically visualize calculus. So put him on like in Korea, he was on an aircraft carrier, just doing normal air traffic control from the aircraft carrier for the flights. Back then, they didn't have, like the Navy didn't even have their own ATCs. They slotted us an AFC person in there, Air Force person, Air Force person. And then he was attached to a forward Marine unit for Vietnam, where they would like carpet bomb the side of the hill, lay down old tank tracks, and that's where they do close air support. Like, do it themselves, but the Hueys. That was really scary. I've heard stories from my half brothers on that one. That's where they had to go out the night before and climb up into a crow's nest and they would do air and ground control all from there. And it was a buddy system because they learned the hard way that the Viet Cong snipers would try to pick them off as they were climbing the tower. Then after that, he got the cush job. During the Cold War, being stationed in Taipei, he was part of the U.S. Taipei Defense Military Augmentation Force. And he was attached to the 627th Air Squadron. So I was born.
So he was a lifer?
Yeah, 36 years.
Wow.
I was born in Taipei, on Taipei, U.S. Taipei Air Force Base. But yeah, he was all over the island, so he was training everybody how to use all the new toys. Because Taiwanese is a nationalistic Republic of China. Formosa's always been an interesting play. In world history, I mean, like a lot of people don't know because we don't get taught this in the United States. That Belgium actually occupied half of Taiwan for most of the 16th century, supporting Britain in the Opium War, because the Queen had deemed that opium was an essential drug of the Queensland.
Yeah, I had no clue.
That's the whole reason that Hong Kong exists, is because, in fact, the emperor before then, I forget his name, but they had invaded as far as Guangdong, which is like where all the cheap stuff's made now, not Taiwan. It was the 70s, this is when I was born. And then this was in like 1647, and so the only way to stop the invaders, the emperor blew up.
And they have land. They're very
At that time, and still today, it was just it's not an actual impound anymore. It was the world's largest reservoir. And so they blew that up and flooded the entire valley, killing 1.5 million Chinese people in the process, women and kids, flooded villages and everything. 1647 to flood out the invading white army. Didn't matter. Hong Kong.
Selling this to elected officials.
And that was always
Yes, the city contest. Yeah, unfortunately, Austin, Austin's way faster. We like to watch what they do. Yeah, we're bigger. I think geographically and by population. Oh, those are cool. It's different.
It's not the bathroom.
Honestly. So it is always nice to watch Austin do it, see what they
Because we're always right underneath.
Which city is more close to Elon Musk?
Which one's closer?
Elon Musk.
Austin. Yeah.
So you have an advantage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Depending on how you look at it.
You know, I mean, I think San Antonio will have a way to like intercept his
The shipments?
materials more.
And we have Toyota, we have like Navistar in the area. There's just a lot in the region.
People forget about all the DoD tech that you have there.
Oh yeah.
The two Air Force bases and everything else.
All the joint bases. Yeah, we have a lot of military tech.
It's kind of funny because AppWorks is here, so you really can be down there because they have so much.
That's a notice of crowded.
Are they what?
Crowded as well.
Yeah. Not really.
Austin's getting very crowded.
We're geographically massive. Like it'll take you 3 hours to drive around the loop or in San Antonio.
San
So we're
Antonio
not
is still one of the larger municipalities.
Seventh.
Seventh.
Seventh largest in the country.
Bidding procedures and all these
All right.
But we're doing good. It's a nice partnership. San Antonio and Austin.
Yeah.
Not competing on resources.
Yeah. One day we'll get a high-speed rail going.
Right? I was like, why did I drive to Austin? That's like we could take the air. I was like, I guess I could take the Amtrak at 6 a.m. and be back at 9 p.m. and then take it.
All right. Let's go ahead and get started with the Q&A. And I think we'll just open it up. So if anybody in the audience has a question, we have a mic in the middle right there. Any burning questions, or do y'all want me to start? Actually, we have one in the chat. Let's start with that one. Okay, so the chat. All right, if we truly expect exponential increase of EVs on the road, is our infrastructure ready to accommodate such penetration? I think this is a question for all of our panelists, so who would like to start?
I can speak to that a little bit. My name's Ryan Granger with Texas Department of Transportation, and we got a lot of questions about that when we were doing public involvement on our NEVI plan. And one of the things that we looked at was what would a worst case scenario look like? And it's tough to do that because, EVs, it depends on the model, depends on the battery, depends on how much of a charge it has. But, we kind of did a scenario where, if every single, DC fast charger and level 2 charger was charging, at its maximum rate at the maximum amount of time, we found that it would draw about 666.7 megawatts. And just for, we compared that to, some numbers from ERCOT that showed that, the load draw, for about 2026 would be about 79,000 megawatts. And so that's about 0.8%. And we really wanted to point a comparison. So we kind of were looking for, something else that we could compare it to. And we found that the president of the Texas Blockchain Association said that, at a given time that, blockchain and data mining and, cryptocurrency, that would draw about 1,000 megawatts at the same time. So it's definitely less than that, but and we realize that these are all high-level, back-of-the-envelope numbers, and a lot of that's going to depend on local transmission and generation, but that gives a little bit of an idea of what the draw could be, at least in Texas.
So, this is George Liang from Infineon. And I have one suggestion first. I think solar panel for every household certainly will help because you can charge in the evening or charge in the daytime or whenever available. Certainly try to reduce the load into utility grid. Another thing, I think you try to prevent like data and Bitcoin mining kind of business because really in my opinion, is consuming too much power and it's not really beneficial for the society. That's my personal opinion.
I guess I'd like to add my opinion, and that is two things. One, our grid and system is based on capitalism, basically here, right? And the bottom line is there's money to be made selling this electricity, right? And so, for example, I know that the folks at Encore, which is a big provider up in many parts of the state, including Dallas-Fort Worth, where there's lots and lots of fleets that will be going electric, they're already doing all their planning, right? They're looking at where the warehouses are, where the fleets will be, where they're gonna have to be adding substations, because yeah, if you've got a huge fleet, that, you know, and you need to have charging of that fleet at a site, it's gonna take a lot. But they're looking at it because they're planning for it and they're planning to provide it, and that's the market that they're in, and they're gonna make a lot of money, so.
And I could add, Harley from the city of San Antonio to I had to pull up the data point just to make sure it was correct. So like I said, CPS Energy is a municipal owned utility in San Antonio. And talking about money to be made, for every $1 spent on gas in San Antonio, only about 1 cent stays in San Antonio. But for electricity, for every $1 spent on charging, 76 stays in San Antonio, 76 cents stays in San Antonio, and 14 cents actually go directly to the municipality itself, the city organization. So to your point, there is a lot of money to be made. Also, that study that we did in 2019, which we are actually a little behind on, in 2019, San Antonio, just from a charging port perspective, as opposed to an electric capacity perspective, had about 1 publicly accessible charging station for every 10 EVs on the road. And the average in like EV leading cities is closer to 5 charging ports for every 10 EVs on the road. So in the perspective of just access to charging, we are not there yet, and we are actually falling behind because adoption is vastly outpacing how quickly we can put chargers in the ground.
This is Jason John Michael, City of Austin. I'll echo what Harley's experiencing there too. We're seeing, you know, adoption rates that are kind of twice the national average here, right? I think y'all are seeing about the same thing. Certain cities, certain metroplexes are seeing, you know, upwards of 12% adoption in EV ownership or usage, and with fleets coming in and providing more mobility as a service solutions that are be electrified, I think that's where we're going to see that really start to stress the equations that we're using right now with the back of napkin kind of approach, but it's what we've got to go on, right? And I'll remind everybody that with the range that most of these batteries have, you know, most people aren't charging every day or every night. You know, they'll go 2-3 days before they need another charge. And so, you know, when you trying to understand the human behavior component of charging is a whole new concept. I'll remind everyone, not that different than when we started creating rest stations around interstates.
It's a good analogy.
Yeah.
I don't have anything further to add.
So can we expand this just a little bit to medium and heavy duty vehicles? So I know we're talking a lot about passenger because that's what Nevi is covering. That's kind of top of mind. However, when we're talking about the infrastructure that's going to be needed to support, I think, we've, from the various studies that have been done across the country in different areas, between the existing capacity and smart charging and other kind of behavioral, ways to try and get people to charge not at peak times, the grid can handle the passenger vehicle side for full penetration of EVs. But the things that I have been reading is that absolutely it cannot handle scaling a medium and heavy duty charging. So any thoughts on that? Because grid infrastructure, just like transportation infrastructure, right? 50 years or so, and we have to start planning at least 10 years ahead of time. So, have y'all thought about medium and heavy duty electrification?
I'll start, and Jason again. We have, mostly because we're looking to change the way that we manage our curb space. So we're looking at it from the perspective of commercial vehicle, adoption into the electric vehicle space. And so, again, if a commercial vehicle is dwelling on curb for a particular period of time, there's an opportunity to look at charging it while it's there. I won't get into inductive versus direct connect. Just know that we're looking at both. But when we look at the grid, the issue there is like there's some specialized cases. One particular solution is bringing both that and a battery type component at the same time. I think also let's remember that in IIJA there is money for other alternative fuels, and hydrogen is still a very viable thing for heavy vehicles. In fact, a company that is operating out in the Resacas in El Paso that is an advanced air mobility company. That company is blending hydrogen and electric to do their test flights because of the size of their vehicle. So in a lot of ways, when we look at, okay, what about heavy things? I'm going and looking at the guys that are trying to get heavy things to fly with alternative fuels, because those folks are trying to figure out some really interesting thrust to weight ratio issues.
I'll throw in an idea here. This is Joe from Intel. One of the things that we've thought of is in terms of autonomous vehicles and trucking. The thing that's really holding back autonomous vehicles are, driving around in city streets. But freeways are pretty easy to navigate because the trucks are just basically going straight. That would be a sort of a first mover, I think, for autonomous vehicles. Plus the fact that it's hard to find people to drive those trucks these days. So there's a potential future where you have trucks that are autonomous only on the highway. They pull off at a certain, let's call it a truck stop, making a very careful exit from the freeway, offload their goods to smaller trucks that are not autonomous to make their way through the city, and then get back on, and then charge, and then load up at that truck stop other goods, and then continue on their way. So you've got an autonomous electric trucking system that is relatively safe, certainly so than navigating city streets. So that's one idea with trucking.
I'll also add, just in sense of electrification, this has to be a holistic solution, and I'm not only talking holistic as in, electric, light duty and heavy duty, but it just has to be a holistic mode of transportation solution. We're not going to be successful if we're not also concurrently, while we're pushing electric vehicles and electric, like single passenger vehicles, if we're not already promoting safe bike infrastructure, if we're not making it easier for people on e-bikes and, regular analog bikes to navigate their cities, if we're not making it safer for pedestrians to use our town, if we're not improving disability access. So, disabled people have enough problem walking and navigating their city just as a pedestrian, let alone in their vehicles. So if we address the problem, I know you went heavy duty and I went bicycle. If we have to address this problem absolutely holistically, because there is no future in which electric vehicles are a successful tool in the toolbox without all of the other tools being implemented as well.
I agree. And when we're talking about the grid and what heavy duty and medium duty might do to it, there's lots of components to the grid, right? So what we haven't talked about is, are there going to need to be more generation facilities available, right? Do we need more coal plants? No, we don't need more coal plants. But when we need more generation facilities, there's a couple of things to consider. One, there's a huge drive towards some really massive battery storage as a new generation component, which works great with solar, right? Works great with wind, so we'll be able to just take advantage of that even when it's not needed, because we don't need all the wind in Texas that we have at night necessarily. So there's that. There's also, and I briefly mentioned this in my comments, and that is thinking about distributed energy resources. There's a massive supply of distributed energy resources and potential out there. And there is, if you think about all these individuals having electric vehicles, if you really could harness all of them as a distributed energy resource and do V2G or do the V2X or whatever the Ford Lightnings are going to do V2V, by the way, which is pretty cool. That's one thing. And then there's the other that, and we haven't really had a chance to talk about this much, but when it comes to resilience, when it comes to the grid, like one of the best models you can think of is electric school buses, right? Because they have a very regular pattern. They can sort of sit in the parking lot and charge when they're not being used. And those pretty big batteries, they can go and power, say, a community center that's part of a resilience hub or something like that. So, there's a lot of components to a grid, but those are things that people are thinking about. And the PUC here in Texas has a docket open talking about distributed energy resources right now, and we're hoping that it'll lead to a pilot program for V2G, because there's so much potential there. Not to mention that when you're talking about needing more generation capability, the first thing and the cheapest thing you need to do is energy efficiency, and that's energy efficiency for homes. There's a ton, if you think about it as a power plant, there's a ton of power just sitting out there with our wasted energy in our homes. That's why the federal money is investing in a lot of this, but in terms of helping with renovations to be able to upgrade efficiency for folks. So there's a lot of things there. And I have to add one other thing. The numbers we're talking about in terms of light duty and adoption, if you want to see fascinating numbers for the state of Texas, look for the DFW Clean Cities website. Just Google DFW Clean Cities electric vehicles, and they have it broken down in really, really interesting ways. You can look by county, you can look by, by type of vehicle, and it's the interesting numbers that you were mentioning always going up. I happen to know that it was at the end of last year that we hit 100,000 electric vehicles in the state of Texas, and on August 10th it was 140,000. So in eight months we jumped 40%, which is pretty cool.
All right. So staying on the grid just for a second longer before we move on to another topic. So a question through the chat. If demand on electric power will spike to accommodate EVs, are we expecting power affordability problems in the future? So peak demand charges, right? I know that's been a real concern. And what's being done? What guardrails are being put into place to?
So I very obviously, you can tell by the terminology that I'm about to use, do not work for the utility. But CPS Energy is doing some pretty cool things in San Antonio. Some of those are pilot rates right now to incentivize that folks who charge their electric vehicles at home charge during off-peak times, and they're actually being charged less than their normal rate to charge during an off-peak time, and that's just one of the options that's being explored right now. Of course, that's for a very niche group of people. It's for people who own electric vehicles and people who charge in their own homes, in their own single-family home. But I mean, it's just one method on the way that we could use.
Did you want to go? I'll just add, and again, I do not represent Austin Energy either, same as Harley here. I'll just add that in my conversations related to this particular subject, it really comes down to how well you manage it. So much like you have to manage the other part of the system, if you have a very good reasoning fabric and you have, sort of the the technology, right, implemented at the right place in the network, both at the edge as well as at the back office, then there's a way to manage that such that you're not necessarily letting just the free market jump the price up, right? Like, there's ways to manage that. If we don't do that, though, yes, I think that is the likelihood that we would see, is we'd see some pretty crazy prices.
But I can tell you, it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue for like Electrify America and the other folks that run charging systems on their networks, that they want something to be done to be able to take care of that. And I happen to know that there's some, I've read, and I'm not an expert on any of these. I'm going to throw this to you, Joe, because you said you worked for Southern California Edison. They have, I think it was them that there are different kinds of ideas out there and pilot programs that are happening. And one is, I think it was SCE that had like a subscription that you could buy into as a fleet owner, so that you could, so there was a certain amount of certainty that the utility was getting about the amount of power you were going to be using, and so they were able to make that work financially for them. So I think that it's something that's on the table that needs to be dealt with, and there are some creative ways people are thinking about dealing with it.
I think in terms of demand charges, I think it's mostly going to be a problem for entities that have to charge at a certain time. So companies that have their workers there during the day and they're charging, fleets that don't have flexibility. You know, you think about Amazon, they're running their trucks from 8 a.m. to midnight, and they've got to charge those trucks in an 8-hour period. Now they've chosen they can do that at night when power prices are lower. But there's creativity that, you know, is being done in fits and starts. San Diego Gas and Electric
Okay, thank you.
was actually paying people, because they're paying people to charge their cars in the afternoon because they had too much solar. The residents of San Diego had so much solar on their rooftops that the city of San Diego was charging negative prices. So they would get people to say, hey, charge your cars heavily in the afternoon, which was crazy when you think about it.
Yeah.
But I think there's room for arbitrage. I think there's room to make money for homeowners who, if they're not using their car in the afternoon, it's sitting in their garage. They they send the energy back to the grid. So I think there's some flexibility there. I think, if demand charges are hurting manufacturing companies, mostly the energy-intensive manufacturing companies, you gotta think about installing or at least taking energy from renewable sources. And they do this very creatively to negotiate PPA contracts for solar on the other part of the country to hedge their energy costs. So, I think that there's many ways to handle that.
Yeah, one of the ways to handle that is really have a smart charging, because you connect all the charging station, right? In the case you have multiple people demand charging, but you can control the actual power delivered to each car, so make sure no crash. If utility grid crash, no one can charge your car. It's not the best. So utilize the smart grid or smart charging setup and leverage your control, especially if you have control, hopefully. So that's one way to reduce the peak impact, because it can crash.
All right, so another question.
Wait, I gotta pile on all
Okay,
of a sudden.
do it.
There's something that came up in my brain. That happens occasionally. So yeah, we're gonna need that anyway, right? Like, cause we're talking about current calculations based off current charging capabilities. Well, like, because of my work, I happen to know some of the folks over at Formula E, the world's, electric racing league. So last season, in 2021 season, the electric race cars they have there, and if you can imagine, they're taking commercially available products, components, I would say, and they're installing them in a way that's creating that high energy and also some really interesting cooling technology. So
much like automobiles, ICE cars, your world's racing leagues are taking the engineering to the next level, right? It's also where we started doing crash stuff, right? Because why? Because of the size of the speed of everything. So last year they couldn't finish a race. Basically, the driver would have to stop halfway through pit, jump out of that car and jump in a fresh battery vehicle and then finish the race. And that was in 2020. 2021's race, they've been working on the battery technology to a point where they can put about 30% of that battery capacity in about 30 seconds. So very close to the same, they're running at 680 or whatever right now. So when I say that is that the same amount of energy is being used in the grid, but how fast it's going into the battery is going to change. So I'm a traffic person, right? So I like to think about everything in space and time. And when you put that into space and time, and if you use the right type of management philosophy, some kind of reasoning fabric over all of the charging network, then you can manage all of that demand, because especially as the charging rates go up, you're going to be able to fit more in the same span of time, assuming that, again, the energy's there. But I think that's another way to meet demand, because then you could also, if you don't have all of the energy you need, you just change your time availability. Sorry.
Well, and Austin Energy has programs, and I imagine they're available elsewhere, where if you agree to let them turn off, change your thermostat on a summer afternoon, if they're getting a little overdone with the demand, you get some kind of incentive. I think they pay for the thermostat and pay $100 or anything. But anyways, ratcheting down the power that's going to charging stations if they're actively charging is another possibility.
All right, so a question in the chat. Beyond EV, how do you think hydrogen fuel cell vehicles will be in the future? How will they compete? I don't know if y'all have thought or about hydrogen. I think about hydrogen. And, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, it's an electric engine, similar, right? But just instead of a battery, it's a hydrogen fuel cell. So, we still need energy to create the hydrogen, electricity for the electrolysis machines. How does that fit into this ecosystem, and where?
Well, I kind of already daylighted that with my response on the heavy vehicle stuff. So yeah, I think that there's still a place for hydrogen. I guess what I'm not too certain on is for how long, right? I think it's part of a transitory element, and not necessarily the end goal. And because of what you just mentioned, Laura, it's when you look at if you consider everything in carbon and look at it from the opportunity cost to get that energy. And so what I was saying in my presentation, if we can focus on carbon and understand how much carbon does it take to create that electron, then we're really starting to work towards a sustainable system that we can manage, into human existence. So yes, I think it has a place now, but I think it does eventually find its way out of our vehicles, personally.
So, Jason, you mentioned earlier, like eVTOLs, vertical takeoff and landing, drones, right? So hydrogen, the greatest thing about hydrogen is just how light it is, right? So do you think it'll be left out of our vehicles flying and not forever, just based on that?
I think it's still transitory. Again, I used the F1 example. I think there's a lot more to do in the lithium-ion space. And then, we haven't really even jumped into solid state yet, right?
Yeah.
And then, then you look at the other inert battery technologies that are coming around, and some of them have the propensity to have even higher output than a lithium-ion battery. What the UT folks are doing,
Graphene.
crafting right now. and some of the Aspire folks that are crafting right now. And so I think that it's where it goes. I think hydrogen in ground transport is going to be here for a little bit. I think we'll see hydrogen being used in air transport for a little bit longer than ground transport. And I think 25 years from now, we'll be talking about how we need to just get off hydrogen.
So I have another question that rolls into that. And anybody from the audience, please come up and interrupt me. And if you could use
Yeah, I'm throwing out really saucy stuff here, guys, to try to solicit some stuff back.
So I have a question about a comparison between a regular car and electrical vehicle. Is there any study on the effect of electrical vehicle on the pavement? As you might know, electric vehicles are heavier than gas-powered models. So the main reason that they are heavier is the batteries. So it's really good that you can make the batteries that have a very high capacity, but how about the weight of the batteries? That can greatly affect our pavements. And the other question is about autonomous vehicle. So it is so nice that you sit in the car and this car drives by itself, but these cars, they all drive in the same direction, same pattern. They don't change their position. So this will put so much pressure on one part of the pavement, and that will, in terms of the asphalt, definitely it will cause rotting. In terms of the concrete pavement, it will crack concrete easily if it doesn't change the position. So is there any study on the effect of electrical vehicle or autonomous vehicle on the pavement? Thank you.
Well, I'm the Department of Transportation guy, so I guess I'm gonna go ahead and take that. As far as the electric vehicle weight, that's something that I just learned about a couple months ago. That a coworker who has an electric vehicle and they have to change their tires about once a year. It's because it's significantly heavier. And I heard that I think next year they're coming out with at least one of the brands of tires. They're coming out with dedicated electric vehicle tires. So I think somebody is looking at that. But as far as the damage to pavement goes, most of the damage is done by larger vehicles, the 18-wheelers. It's the amount of damage done by a passenger vehicle is usually pales in comparison by the amount of damage done by a huge 18-wheeler, especially in areas of the state where that really aren't designed for an 18-wheeler. Like out where they're in kind of the Midland, Odessa area of Texas, there's a lot of oil and gas extraction and fracking. But a lot of these locations are out in rural areas, so they're taking these humongous 18-wheelers, and they've got these huge loads of water that they use for the fracking, especially, and they're taking on these country roads and they just tear them up. So that's just to kind of illustrate. But I really don't know of any research being done on the impacts on pavement, for autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles. But that's. We do have folks who research those, and do problem statements, with the universities, and that might be something that we need to look at in the future, though.
Yeah, we should ask NCAT, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they do all the asphalt testing, and they got the track with the, semis going around. We should be asking them. That's a great question.
And I have a sneaking suspicion, because I have a friend that has an electric, has a Tesla. He drives it like he stole it. And so I think there's other things that are going on related to tires other than just the battery. I think the battery is a huge component of it, but because you're looking at an electric motor with a torque converter on the wheels, when you take your foot off the brake, off the gas, you're getting all that friction, coefficient of friction down on the rubber and the asphalt. So You know, that's why when the circular economy slide, I was like, we got to make sure that as we look to bring electric vehicles fully into the market, we need to make sure that we're thinking about those kind of things. That particular issue is a driver training issue, right? If you understand how to it's about going from ICE to electric, and that's a thing, right? That's a thing. Humans will learn how to drive an electric different than they drive their ICE vehicles. Well, at least we hope so, because yeah, the tire is going. They're going quick, and what does that mean? Where is that particulate matter going, y'all? Right? That's an important thing happening. So that, to me, I think is where we need to get NCAP moving on that. Maybe through a pooled fund study or something like that. Get a few different states that have enough vehicle miles, big states, I think, and that'll be enough to prove pull the information together to actually postulate some of this and decide, okay, how do we then manage that particular part of the equation?
Right.
I love that question because, I think about EVs and now you're thinking about concrete and it's fun. But this is a conversation that comes up at the state capitol, interestingly, when we're talking about what the fair fee for an electric vehicle driver would be for road maintenance based on just some kind of fee. I mentioned there's even talk about making a vehicle mile traveled based on vehicle miles traveled. But it's all about how much damage are you doing to the roads compared to other cars. And I have seen a study that was done, I believe it's a public study, it was done by the Regulatory Assistance Project that got into excruciating detail about, and it's not so much about electric vehicles, but it's about weight, and which is the fundamental thing, although you're bringing up another factor that could be involved. But then it's all about, well, we make the roads wider because the trucks are wider too, so, that needs to be taken into account. And so it was a lot of stuff about that. When it comes to trying to set a fair fee and taking into account the weight, I have a feeling at the Capitol it's not going to get that detailed in terms of a refined scale of weight, but there is a registration fee, right, and it's based on weight at this point. And I think most of the vehicles that are on the market today are below that cutoff weight, 6,000 pounds or whatever it is. So anyway, so people are looking at that and realize that it's a thing about EVs, that they are going to be having those impacts.
So
the AV side, we didn't answer that.
wait, before you move on though,
Okay.
I just want to make one plug, right? So the problem can also be a part of the solution, okay? So we know that we already throw out about 260 million tires in this country every year. That could double with EVs because they go through them about twice as fast. We know that from the OEMs. They're working on trying to innovate. Now, we also know that if you put rubber in your asphalt, that asphalt lasts a whole lot longer, right? NCAT had rubber modified asphalt at, 12 or 15%?
Yep.
On their test track, it lasted for 6 years. They were looking to get another 3 years. So every 3 years, right, is 10 years on NCAT. So asphalt that held up for basically 20 years already, and they wanted to push it another round just because it was performing so well. It performs in all weather types, right? They're starting to use it up north. For a long time, they thought, oh, the freeze-thaw cycle, no. But what they're learning now is that it's actually a lot better. Pennsylvania started using it. Arizona uses, almost 20%
Right.
RMA.
Right.
So I'm just going to put it out there. The problem can be a part of the solution, and that's how we need to think about the circularity piece of it. All right, now go to the AV part. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that was good. I forgot about that part. And on the AV part, I would say, so, I am the guy that helped bring forward Argo's solution here. And I can say that if you're working with the right kind of partners, that have a level of community responsibility. They understand these things. I mean, they've been talked about. And most of it's been talked about from the hard science perspective without bringing in the operational domain of actually when an AV company wants to deploy. And so I can say that, you know, the companies that we're working with, they understand that construct, and they're already deciding that they're not going to be pin the tail on the donkey with that, right? That is not something that they're looking for their systems to do. So they find ways to essentially position the vehicle as such so that it's not creating that type of rutting. I'll also say that in all of the testing, so Ford Argo has been testing in Austin since mid-2018. And of all of the different charrettes that we've had related to the unique things that they've found in our environment, I can tell you that most times than not, they're not able to stay centered in the lane anyway. For other built environment reasons, because that was a hard science thing that came out, and that assumes that every road out there looks exactly the way it does on CAD, and it doesn't.
Great. All right. Let's go back to the chat. Would we ever see self-charging EVs using built-in solar to ease demand on the grid?
I'd love to. My husband's been planning that for a long, long time, but it's not clear that the weight works out. I don't know the details at this point.
I think we have to see some really crazy innovations in photovoltaic
Yeah.
before we really see that.
Yeah.
But I think it's always been something that everybody's thought about. I really think that it's more of a possibility in the electric low-speed market. Again, I mentioned that there's a bunch of vehicles probably coming in the next 10 to 15 years if all the companies that are announcing or have roadmaps to it actually get there. So it's not to say that all of those vehicles will show up one day, but because of the weight and the not only the weight of the battery but the weight of the vehicle itself, I think you have probably more things that you can do with solar in the under 3,500 pound category.
Once again, you're going to tell by the language I use that I am not an engineer. We have seen models, and there have been small tests for not solar panels on the vehicles themselves, but solar panels on top of the roadways, and then the roadways themselves being like charging pads for the EV. So as the car is moving on the roadway, it is charging from power coming up from the roadway, and that power is being generated by solar panels on top of the roadway. So that also fixes or really resolves two issues. One, the charging issue, the capacity issue, and then thirdly, the urban heat island issue that we're facing really badly in Texas.
All right. Another question?
I have a number of questions, but I'm just going to start with one that goes to Jason and Harley. It's very simple. I think on Electric Drive, the charging stations that you have there, and I believe, Harley, you said you had 25 charging sites on public property, as long that you allowed other entities to put in there, as long as there was no net cost to the city of San Antonio. Question is, who owns those? Do they charge for the power? And if they do, how is the pricing set for that?
Sorry, I'm tired of leaning. Okay, so our contract with Blink is my favorite thing because it's so fun. So we have a contract with Blink Charging using TechSpent Volkswagen mitigation funding. And essentially the way it's going is a lease. I am leasing you a parking space and you are allowed to operate a electric vehicle charger in that space. In most cases, the Blink has set up its own service drop directly from the utility. So they pay an account to CPS Energy, our electrical utility. They are not pulling electricity off of the building. There are some cases where that is not possible, like our older buildings downtown with our crazy electrical grid down there. But 90% of the time, that's what's happening. They pay CPS directly. CPS Energy had a series of pilots for rates going on that they kind of forced charging companies into at first. And now they kind of said, whatever, pick the rate that works best for you. So they pay different rates for every site. The rate that they pay at the zoo is not the same rate that they pay at the District 9 Senior Center. There is a fee to charge at all of these stations. So if you are an electric vehicle driver and you drive to the District 9 Senior Center, you will pay for that charging, similar to how you pay for gas. And Blink takes that money, and then there is a 50-50 revenue share with the city of San Antonio after programmatic costs are met. So after Blink recoups all of their costs, which they are relatively quickly for electricity, for installing the charging, because Blink's also doing all of the make ready. So Blink is pulling the electrical out there, Blink is doing the accessible. I don't know why they did this, but we're having a great time with it. They're paying for everything once programmatic costs are met. It's a 50-50 revenue share. Blink owns, operates, and maintains the stations. We have an amenity. Now, how we chose those sites was very specific. So obviously we can only choose sites that the city of San Antonio owns. But the city of San Antonio, the Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity Office has developed an equity matrix, which looks at tons of different factors. We did not look at EV adoption rates per area as a factor because people who already have adopted EVs have access to charging. We're not interested in supplementing that at this point. We're looking at providing charging to people who are on the cusp of buying an EV, and in areas that don't have access to charging. We wanted to fill in the dark areas of those maps that I showed you. So we looked at our equity matrix. We looked at local ground level air quality. We looked at all sorts of things. We did not look at adoption rates to choose our sites. Did that answer?
Yeah, well, the question is really,
Sorry, can you use the mic just because folks on Zoom can't hear you?
the question is really the charge to the driver for kilowatt hours or whatever however that charge is set up. How is that rate set? Is that just whatever the entity wants to charge, or they can just charge whatever they want to? Nobody.
Essentially, yes. Essentially,
Okay.
Blink as a private company can charge whatever they want. There's not a stipulation in our contract that says it has to be a certain percentage above or below a certain rate, because Blink is also allowed to choose the rate from CPS Energy that they pay. So Blink at each site can charge a different amount.
Is there a question then about price gouging or something?
That's not an issue we've run into yet. We've actually had feedback that one of our sites was expensive and Blink lowered it immediately. We've had a great relationship with them because they want people to choose their charger over the charge point down the street.
Okay, all right.
And for me, now is when I wished I could phone a friend called Carl Popham over at Austin Energy, who's my compatriot in this space. So I'm not going to get all the rates right. I'll just say that out loud. Before we allowed third-party charging, so let's go back a little bit. In 2018, there was no one else that was allowed to sell energy or resell energy inside Austin city limits because of the Austin Energy. Austin Energy had to go and clean up some ordinances, some city ordinances, so that we could do that. Once that was done, so before then, Austin Energy had a partnership with ChargePoint, and that's how we put the chargers down at Electric Drive. Those are on grid. It's a unique area, right? I mean, it's right in front of the Seaholm plant. Moving forward, it became understandably difficult with building energy to understand how to properly regulate that, considering that you were going and asking for energy back from somebody who already bought it, right? So that's when, in addition to that, bringing in allowing the marketplace to open up in Austin, right? And so by making those changes, it allowed third-party hosts to come in and provide that charging element, and then work with building owners if that's where the charging needed to be, because that was where the demand was. And then also, they, as part of that deal, though, they had to adopt Austin Energy's EV Anywhere policies, right? And so Austin Energy has its own set rates. You can do I think it's a monthly fee contract kind of thing, and you can get access to everything for like $4 and something cents. It's under $5.
For the level 2.
That's for level 2 only. That's correct. And then the DC Fast are running at I can't remember the rate for Austin Energy's at Electric Drive, but then again, if you're at ChargePoint locations, you're either using as a ChargePoint customer, if you're coming in right off and you're not a charge point customer, I mean, most people end up being one as soon as they charge the first time, I've noticed, because of the higher rate of not being a customer of theirs. And then, you know, we're also seeing where Tesla's coming in and doing their unique play with their own charge locations. So right now in Austin, we kind of have a little bit of a mixed bag. Most folks like to find the public chargers that are part of the EV Anywhere, or part of the public DC Fast that's part of the original ChargePoint Austin Energy partnership. And then you're seeing these other charge point locations really start to pop up everywhere in Austin to help support the demand.
And I think it's called the plug-in anywhere.
Plug-in Anywhere. Thank
Plug-in
you.
everywhere, anywhere, one of those things.
Right.
That's the $4.17 for level 2, as much as you can eat, all you can eat a month. And it's my understanding that Austin Energy owns some of those, but many of them are not owned by Austin Energy, but they subscribe and are part of this $4.17 deal, including the charging stations that are at that affordable housing multifamily project that I was mentioning, where we're thinking about getting the Austin City fleet, retired vehicles into the hands of those families. So think about it, those families are going to be able to cut their fuel costs to $4.17 a month. That's crazy. Some of those folks have fuel costs of, you know, hundreds of dollars a month. And so it's really, really significant.
And I'll point out that Laura used to be a city council person, and so helped start all this back when she was on council, and now where she is at Tran-SET, it's providing a, so if y'all are going back and doing your work in your own areas, just know that creating the ecosystem, the club, is really important, and then being able to connect to others in other cities is extremely important with all of this.
All right, we'll take this one from the chat. Lithium-ion batteries can ignite in a crash due to stranded energy in the batteries, and it appears first responders have more difficulty dealing with this problem and even run a risk of electrocution. What is being done to protect occupants, first responders, and other road users in the event of a crash?
Okay, I'll take that one too. I'll start it at least. So at Austin, in Austin, with Austin Fire and Austin Police, we saw some of our first battery fires pretty long ago, considering that we started this initiative in 2016, really got formatively moving on it in 2017. And so most of our all of our first responders, I should say, have been through training charrettes. They've done actual live training events. And let's just say that in Austin, we've had our fair share. So we've already had some real world experience in that regard. So on the first responder side, that's our main focus, right, is to ensure that we're ensuring safety in our transportation system. Let's not forget that. And the AIM High Group is a group in Austin that looks at different crashes and severe crashes and other things that require a certain amount of human response and material force in order to take care of, whether that's a big crash or a big diesel fire because of a tanker or whatever it happens to be. And so most of that's done inside that group. It's a group that's managed across a multitude of jurisdictions, both ourselves, TxDOT, and other first responders. So we're prepared from that perspective. I can't really answer the passenger in the vehicle related question. I think that belongs to the auto manufacturer. And then, you know, the other thing is recall that we do have an ITS system that allows us to provide alerts to drivers. And so that's another way that we can also inform drivers that there may be a fire ahead and those kind of things.
I can talk a little bit about the passenger vehicle perspective just on a very high level. So part of our EVSA program is education and outreach. At the beginning of the program, it was very much, you know, choose EV because there were only like 15 models and not a lot of people using them. Now it's electric mobility in totality, including a safety campaign. So we are about to launch some safety information. Like it was mentioned earlier, EVs are fast. You have to learn how to drive them differently. Some of those safety materials will be what happens if you're a passenger in an electric vehicle and you're in a crash. How should you behave? We have a Clean Air for Kids program, which is a school program. We're looking at including some of that program in their schools. I don't know what program this was, but when I was in the 3rd grade, we had like a firefighter come to our school and say, if you get in a car accident and there's a down power line, you have to bunny hop away and you have to do this and do that. And it would be similar to that. So that's what we're looking at on our side for as part as drivers and passengers.
I know also that there's, it's a crazy thing, I think it's in West Virginia. There's a college there that actually has developed a training program for first responders to electric vehicles. So there's standards being developed and they do training for folks around the country. I think Austin's been part of that.
Yeah, in fact, Harley's reminded me of another thing. We're about to launch it. We're trying to launch a safety city. It's something that we're working with the Austin District on as well. There's one in Frisco. There's a few of them around the country. It's a very unique product, I call it. The one in Frisco is the one I'm going to use as an example, but they're all pretty much the same. They're a miniature version of a city built at 5/8 scale, specifically for the purposes of multi-generational education of the youth. Why 5/8? Because some really good engineers at the Volpe Center in Virginia, where USDOT does a lot of their research, found that 5/8 scale was perfect for little humans, because that way they can see the built environment without it being the real big environment, and it's at scale to what their height and visual acuity and all of those kind of things. These safety cities, schools come in and other groups come in and they run the kids through it. It involves everything from fire safety to now, traffic safety and pedestrian safety related elements. And we're looking to build a modern one today. And we're actually going to have both an area for the youth as well as an area for the elderly. Because as we know with autonomy, that's likely one of our first large demographics that we're looking to service with that. And there's a lot of learning curve, right? I mean, for instance, just an autonomous shuttle coming up and how it deploys its steps, for instance, is something that may not deploy the same way every time. So helping elderly understand how to board and light from these vehicles is incredibly important. Think about those kind of things as you continue with your work and how important it is to make sure that we're bringing some level of multi-generational education along with it.
I did just want to take a moment to validate that concern. I know that we're saying, we're training people, we have these programs. That is very valid, and it is a very real obstacle from us. We haven't had, I don't think, as many battery vehicle fires as Austin has, but our office has gotten complaints from apartment tenants saying that the property owner is ripping electric vehicle chargers out of the garages because they're convinced their garages are going to explode. So this is, as it's a concern, it might, be a little inflated. There might be ways to get around it. I mean, your gas vehicle can also catch on fire. A gas station can also explode. But it's very valid, and that obstacle is something that we do need to tackle.
Ryan, I know TxDOT has a lot of emergency responders and roadside assistance folks. Have you guys talked about this at all?
As far as I know, I don't think that we've looked into that. We probably should, but as far as I know, I don't think that that's been on our radar. But I like the idea of using our intelligent infrastructure. Those are the dynamic messaging signs you see along the highways. I think that using those in case of a electric vehicle car fire, that would make a lot of sense and have a lot of utility. So, but I'm just make sure I'm not lying to everybody. I'm going to double check and make sure that you'd see if we do have anything that any first responders that that do specialize in that or work on that.
I'm from Louisiana. It's a very wet environment, and oftentimes when you're at the gas station pumping gas, you're standing in a centimeter of water, what have you. And we've all been taught from a young age electricity and water don't mix. So, in deploying charging stations, are we looking at building pads on those to make sure that people aren't standing in water when they're plugging their chargers in, or is that even a concern?
It does. I've seen the site designs that I've seen do include a raised concrete pad before, and some of them are some of the designs I've seen include a solar shade over it, right? So there's both a grid tied and a battery tied kind of component to it. And so usually because of the cantilevered structure, that solar shade, they're basically providing a foot, and then you just come right on top of it. And it helps with, I mean, that way it's a little cheaper and it's not as intrusive as trying to do a drilled shaft foundation, for instance, for the same thing.
And the cords on those chargers are heavy duty. They're not meant to break and be exposed or anything. But I was just gonna say, most of the ones we have are on an elevated concrete pad or are on the sidewalk. And I would caution you to be careful with doing that, because while that's great from a safety standpoint, a lot of times that gets you out of ADA compliance. A lot of these charging stations are ADA compliant by themselves, flush onto the ground. The second you put it on a pad, the screen is now out of reach for ADA compliance. And that's an easy fix. For blink stations, you just drop the screen a few inches and that's easy peasy. But that's something that's not brought to your attention until your disability access office comes and tells you.
Okay, so I have a question about resiliency, and I know a few of you have already touched on it. So as we electrify the economy, right, not just transportation, but the whole economy, you know, we're basically going down to this one fuel source. And so in the event of emergencies, extreme weather events, you know, we're not going to be able to pull from multiple different fuel sources in the same way that we are now, for better or for worse, right? We have an option right now. So what are your thoughts around this to build in the resiliency to make sure that the charging stations don't go down, that the system is resilient, especially during times of emergency, when folks are in evacuation? Go ahead.
I know y'all talking.
Everybody's looking at me. I guess I gotta do this. When we were putting together our plan for NEVI, one of the things that we did was put more chargers along evacuation routes and areas along the coast. So the federal guidelines say that we have to have 4 150 kilowatt chargers. I know that Eric knows what I'm talking about. And in most cases near to the coast and along evacuation corridors, we put about 6 to 8. So it's, you know, and we realize that that's, you know, a drop in the bucket. That's not going to, you know, solve the problem. But that's one way that we're trying to address it. And I think that, you know, one good thing about this federal program is that, you know, as light speed as it has been so far, I think that the rollout of the actual charging stations will be relatively gradual. So I think that, you know, we'll have an opportunity to, you know, do other things on other fronts to help with resiliency. And I know that, you know, the folks in my crew who work on Texas's long-range transportation plan, that's one of the things that they're working on, which is a requirement of the latest surface transportation reauthorization bill. So they're really looking at resiliency and, you know, trying to, you know, figure out, you know, what, because especially in an area like Texas, you know, we've got areas like Louisiana that, you know, are super wet. We've got areas that are prone to, you know, super dry, like my in-laws in El Paso. We've got other areas, you know, that are all over the place. So, you know, what resiliency is along the coast is going to be different than it is, you know, along, you know, the other areas of the state. And I realize that that's getting away from, you know, from electric vehicles, but you know, just like Harley said earlier about, you know, you kind of need all of the above options, you know, when you're dealing with these. You know, we want to take a, you know, a holistic approach to it and really, you know, approach resiliency as a whole, and I'll be making sure that that includes electric vehicles.
And I can add to that as well. There are EV chargers that are eligible for FEMA funding because they are little micro mobility hubs. The first one that comes to mind is the EV Arc, and that is a completely self-contained EV charger that is totally portable. I mean, it's portable on a truck, but it's portable. It has a solar panel on it, and it has a charger, and you can trick that out to have whatever you want on it. You can put an emergency radio on it. You can put an AED and CPR device on it. You can put flashing lights on it. So a lot of places have those. I know some national parks have them. just because they don't have access to electricity. It was cheaper to do that than to do. Are you looking at the picture? Oh, thanks. I think it's an EV arc.
Yeah.
I think that's what it. Yeah. So they're very cool. Yeah, look. So and you can drop that anywhere. So there are some cities that bought them and use them for things. Thank you. So lovely. That just have those as like their permanent charging infrastructure. Some of them have stashes that they deploy in case of emergency. And then I would just like to kind of note, because we get this question a lot of like, what happens when the power went out? Well, during Winter Storm Uri, which was the event, my house had no power, no water, and there was no gas in a 4-mile radius. So I was in a pinch either way. And I know there were other people in similar situations. Luckily, I'm not providing any life-saving services to anyone, so it doesn't matter if I'm stuck at home. But for some people, that does matter, and they can use a solution like this, potentially that it is eligible for FEMA grant funding.
Just on this is exactly what we're using for the NSF Civic Innovation Challenge Georgian Acres Hub, which is a resiliency hub and a community mobility hub at the same time. So this is what we're looking at installing in neighborhoods around Austin to provide the ability to charge electric low-speed vehicles and other vehicles as part of our plan to help pull people out of the neighborhoods onto the high-capacity lines for Project Connect. I call it the pizza pie analogy of southern cities. We got a small little city center that's like the plastic thing that keeps the cheese off the cardboard. We have radiating lines that were originally farm-to-market roads that brought goods to market. And then we filled up the pizza with neighborhoods and squiggly little roads that 40-foot buses can't turn in. And so our transit issue in Austin is much like most southern cities. And so to fix that, we have to find ways to pull residents out of the neighborhoods, give them other modes, preferably electric, sustainable modes, to get them to the high capacity lines, and then they can use the transit system that's coming.
I think that's a good question. It's an open question. People are trying to figure it out right now. And, the ARC is very, very expensive, right? But people are buying them because they're starting to figure out the answer to that. And if you were stuck at home with no power and you had an electric vehicle and you were able to hook it up to your house, you might be able to actually power your house. And there were stories during Uri about like families with young babies going into their Teslas and being able to stay warm. I have talked to a couple of folks about the question. One is a very large insurance company, and they said, what do we do about being able to, if we convert our fleet to electric vehicles, our job is to go into areas that have no electricity. There is the problem that gas might not be available there either, so it's not like an individual thing. They're actually thinking about starting to go hybrid to start instead of right into that. A lot of people say don't do it halfway, go all the way, because for whatever reason. But for them, that's going to be the solution as a first step to move toward reducing it. Also talk to HEB, and they go into areas that are hit by disasters, and several people in the state of Texas have said we wish that they were our FEMA for the state, because they do such a good job of responding to disasters. When I asked them, the first thing they said is, well, first of all, at our central locations and all of our grocery stores, we already have backup generators because we can't afford for our freezers to go out. But they're not going to electric for their big delivery trucks yet. They are electrifying their drayage and their warehouse, smaller vehicles, doing a lot of other things. But I think there's a lot still to be worked out on that.
And I'd like to, back to the resiliency thing, and was that in an all-electric world?
Right. So as we convert, right, and we get rid of other fueling sources, right?
It's all about the batteries and Second Life. I think it's a lot about that. I mean, in an all-electric world, I see Second Life batteries being installed on curbs everywhere, literally, and tying them to the grid, and utilizing that battery storage at times where the demand's the right. We talked around pricing, in the middle of the day and all that sort of stuff. If I've charged those batteries at night, we can use that during the day to store or to charge other things. So
And then in cases of resiliency, it goes back to that overall reasoning fabric that I think's needed across, no matter who's doing the charging, public, private, P3, whatever. Everybody's got to subscribe to that, right? Because it's your responsibility as a provider of energy to who you're getting your energy from. I think that's the way it needs to be looked at. That protects ERCOT and others from dealing with a lot of the changes that happen related to some of the renewables bringing into the grid, into the supply. So, you know, both batteries as well as making sure that we have the right kind of management technologies to take care of those particular scenarios is what's needed.
All right, and we are right at time. So I want to thank our panel. I think we're probably going to hang out for maybe 5 minutes or so if anyone wants to catch us, if you didn't take down our contact information or something like that and you want to continue the discussion. I think we're all more than happy to continue the discussion. And if we can just thank our panel and give you a big round of applause.
That was probably the longest.